Hello, dear dreamer. Welcome to the Gentle Stories. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to share true tales of survival, strength, and the human spirit. Maybe you're here to relax, to drift off, or just feel inspired by what others have overcome. Before we begin, tap like and subscribe to join us on more journeys like this. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it? Now, take a deep breath, settle in, and let your mind wander into these gentle stories of resilience. The morning sky was draped in a soft lavender hue, the kind that made everything feel gentle and unhurried. A light breeze fluttered through the olive trees, and birds sang their morning prayers with humble joy. Ayan stood at the edge of the garden behind his home, his rucksack slung over one shoulder, a flask of warm water tucked into the side pocket. He took one last look at the house, its old wooden door, the pomegranate tree that leaned over the balcony, the faint creak of the wind chime his mother had hung when he was a boy. Today, Ayan was leaving for a journey he hadn't fully planned, yet somehow always knew he would take. He wasn't running away, nor chasing glory. He simply felt it was time. Time to find stillness beyond noise, clarity beyond clutter. He whispered Bismillah under his breath and took his first step toward the unknown. The path began gently. The dirt road curved alongside quiet hills, and every step crunched softly under his well-worn sandals. The sun warmed the earth slowly, and the scent of thyme and wild herbs drifted up as he walked. He carried nothing more than the essentials: some dry dates, a Quran wrapped in cloth, a compass, and a notebook his late father had once used during his travels. By midday, Ayan reached a quiet ridge overlooking a small valley. He sat beneath a cedar tree, its shade cool and generous. The silence here wasn't empty. It was full of life unseen, full of whispers carried by the wind, full of meaning waiting to be found. He closed his eyes and listened, not to the noise of the world, but to the rhythm of his breath, the quiet beat of his heart, and the rustle of leaves, as if the trees themselves were sharing secrets. Every journey begins twice, he remembered his father saying, once with your feet and once with your heart. This was the second beginning. He spent the first night beside a gentle stream, the sound of flowing water lulling him into calm. His fire was small, only for warmth, and he cooked nothing, only sipped from his flask and chewed on dates. The stars blinked quietly above like soft lanterns held up in the sky. Ayan thought about the comforts he had left behind. His mother's gentle voice in the morning, the soft rug under his feet, the call to prayer echoing from the masjid at dawn. But he didn't feel sadness. Instead, there was a serene awareness, like the world had grown wider and quieter at once. As he lay on the earth wrapped in a light shawl, he made dua, not for safety or riches, but for understanding, for patience, for presence. The next day, the terrain shifted. The hills grew steeper and the trees thinned. The wind carried a cooler edge now, brushing against his face like a quiet reminder. Pay attention. He moved slowly, not because he was tired, but because every step felt like a prayer. He paused often, not to rest, but to observe. A cluster of ants building a bridge from leaf to stone, the way the clouds moved like soft ships across a sky of milk and blue, the scent of pine mixed with earth after a brief drizzle. In the late afternoon, he discovered a narrow path leading to a small clearing, where an abandoned stone shelter stood. Its walls were still strong, though the roof had given in. A vine had claimed one corner, and moss softened the edges of the stones. He smiled gently. Shelter when you least expect it. He decided to stay the night. Inside, he laid his shawl on a patch of clean ground and sat cross-legged. He took out the Quran and began to recite quietly, the sound of his own voice comforting and familiar. The verses echoed gently against the walls, as if the stones themselves listened with reverence. He slept well that night, wrapped in peace and cool air. No fear, just awareness. And then, something changed. At dawn, as the first light broke through the broken roof and spilled golden onto the floor, Ayan awoke to find faint tracks just outside the shelter. Small, cautious footsteps, likely a wild fox or jackal. But it wasn't the animal tracks that unsettled him. It was the second pair, deeper, wider, clearly human, Someone had passed nearby in the night. He looked around. No voices, no movement, just the same quiet breeze. Still, something stirred inside him, not fear but a heightened sense of stillness. He made wudu from a small spring nearby, offered Fajr with calm and clarity, and reminded himself, trust in Allah and tie your camel. Today's journey, he knew, would require more than stillness. It would require faith. He packed his things and stood at the edge of the clearing, the same way he had stood at the edge of his garden days before. He had no map, only a direction and a purpose that was still unfolding. As he took his next step forward, the wind picked up softly, brushing his back as if to say, "You're not alone." The sun had not yet reached its height when Ayan found himself walking deeper into unfamiliar terrain. The trees here grew taller, more ancient. Their branches reached like arms over the narrow path, casting shifting shadows on the ground. The silence had a new texture to it, less comforting, more alert, not threatening, just aware. He remembered the footprints from that morning, bigger than his, fresh and leading somewhere off the main path. Ayan didn't follow them. Instead, he chose his own way forward, staying mindful, moving with calm purpose. He whispered Subhanallah when he passed through a cluster of trees where wild jasmine grew, their fragrance lifting the mood of the moment. Everything around him felt designed, not in chaos but in quiet wisdom. By late afternoon, the forest began to thin again, revealing a slope of dry golden grass and large sun-warmed stones. At the crest of the hill, he paused, wiping his brow with a cloth. From there, he saw a lake below, its surface like polished silver in the late sunlight. The sight brought ease to his heart. Water meant rest, and maybe answers. He descended slowly, the grass rustling around his legs, insects darting up like tiny sparks. At the lake's edge, he dipped his hands into the cool water, cupping some to his lips. It tasted clean, sweet even. Alhamdulillah. He settled by the water, removed his sandals, and let his feet soak. A breeze stirred the reeds, and for a long while he did nothing. Just breathed, just listened. That stillness again, this time softer, but the moment didn't stay untouched. A soft shuffle behind him, a rock turning over, a twig snapping. Ayan turned calmly. Across the lake on the opposite bank, a figure stood beneath the trees, cloaked in brown, still as stone. Not approaching, not hiding, just there. Ayan didn't move. Neither did the stranger. Then, without a word, the figure raised one hand slowly. Just a greeting. Not a wave, but a gesture of peace. Ayan nodded in return. After a few more heartbeats, the figure turned and disappeared behind the trees. No words, no footsteps. Just the wind again, tracing circles across the lake. Ayan sat there for a long time thinking. Who was that? A traveler, a shepherd, another soul seeking solitude? He felt no fear, only curiosity wrapped in caution. The world, he reminded himself, was not always made of what we see. Some things were meant to pass by gently like clouds. He made wudu by the water and prayed asr beside the reeds. The ground beneath him felt grounded in something sacred. Every posture of prayer felt anchored, every breath more aware. As the sun began to dip, he moved to a nearby grove of short trees. He built a simple shelter of branches and leaves, nothing more than a lean-to. Tonight he would sleep closer to the earth again. He lit a small fire and warmed a piece of flatbread he had brought. No spices, no meat, just the simplicity of provision. He remembered the hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, how he would be grateful for the simplest of meals, and he smiled. Under the darkening sky, the stars began to return. He opened his notebook for the first time since the journey began, flipping through old pages filled with his father's neat handwriting. Notes on birds, trees, constellations, du'as written in the margins, reflections on ayahs from Surah Kaf. At the back, a folded paper, a map drawn in pencil. Not to treasure or landmarks, but to places of quiet. Places to listen. The lake was marked there, faintly, and near it, a symbol, a circle, and inside it, an eye. He stared at it for a long time. The fire crackled beside him. The night deepened, Suddenly a sound, not close but carried, the faint ring of a bell or a chime, soft, distant, almost melodic. He looked toward the trees where the stranger had been. The wind rustled gently through the leaves again. Maybe he was being watched, or maybe he was being guided. He pulled the shawl around his shoulders and lay on his side, the stars winking above like promises yet to be fulfilled. The lake lapped softly behind him and he whispered a dua, asking for protection and for clarity. Sleep came slowly, but peacefully. And in his dreams he walked under trees that whispered his name, and a voice said, "Not all who wander are lost, but some are chosen to find." Morning came not with loud birdsong, but with a silver stillness, as if even the sky was holding its breath. Ayan opened his eyes slowly. The ashes of last night's fire glowed faintly beneath a blanket of white ash, and the cool scent of dew touched his skin. He sat up gently. The lake still shimmered in quiet reflection. Not a ripple stirred its surface. After Fajr, he wrapped his shawl and walked barefoot along the edge of the water, letting the wet earth cool his soles. He didn't speak, didn't think too hard, just allowed himself to feel the morning, its texture, its presence. That map in his father's notebook, the symbol near this lake, it tugged at him. He returned, packed his things, and moved quietly into the forest in the direction the stranger had gone the day before. He wasn't chasing, just following the thread of something unseen. The forest path was not marked. Branches brushed his shoulders. Thorny vines reached toward his ankles. But Ayan moved with patience, as if the forest were a friend testing his gentleness. Then, something curious. On a tree ahead, carved into the bark, a symbol, a circle, and inside it, the eye, just like in the notebook. He paused. Not fear, just alertness, a heightened breath. Someone had made this. Someone knew this path. He reached out and touched the carving. The bark was rough but old, not fresh, maybe years ago. A sign left for someone else, or for him. He pressed on. Hours passed under the trees. The light filtered through in soft patterns, dancing on the ground like verses unspoken. He found another tree, then a third, each marked, each older than the last. The marks formed a quiet trail, guiding him deeper, ever deeper. He stopped for dhuhr near a small clearing, where sunlight poured in like gold over soft moss. He laid down his shawl, recited a few ayahs, and rested his back against the trunk of a large oak. There, in the silence, he began to think about his father. He'd never spoken much about his travels. Only left clues, notes, sketches, thoughts scribbled in the margins, but he always said, "You will know when it's time to see what I saw." And Ayan had wondered if this journey, this forest, this moment, was what his father meant. Later he crossed a shallow stream and began to climb a gentle incline. The wind here had a voice, soft, steady, humming through the leaves. It didn't speak in words, but it meant something. He listened. Then through the trees ahead he saw it. A small wooden structure. Old, hidden by time and overgrowth, like a cabin or perhaps a watchpost. Half its roof had caved in. A wall was leaning, but still standing. Moss covered the sides like a warm blanket, and beside the doorway hung from a nail a bell, the same soft chime he'd heard 2 nights before. Ayan approached slowly. The door creaked open with just a touch. Inside, the light streamed in through a broken panel, falling on what seemed to be a low prayer mat. Worn, faded, but unmistakably used. Someone had prayed here. For how long, he didn't know. Days? Years? And on the shelf, an oil lantern, a rolled cloth, and a leather pouch. He didn't touch anything. He only sat near the entrance and whispered, "Subhanallah." Who had lived here? Who had left? He opened his notebook again. On the final page, in the corner, a scribble. "Where silence meets prayer, I left what mattered most." His father's handwriting. Ayan looked up at the old prayer mat again. This was not just a journey, it was a return. That night he stayed in the shelter. He cleared the floor gently, mended what he could with rope and patience. He lit the lantern, though only for a little while, and then extinguished it to watch the stars through the roof. The wind returned with its song, but this time it sounded different, like it wasn't whispering to him anymore. It was whispering with him, and just before he drifted into sleep he heard soft footsteps outside. Not threatening, not hurried, just present. He remained still, a soft knock on the doorway, not loud. He turned, but no one was there. Only the wind and the echo of something that felt like remembrance. Morning arrived gently, like a guest who knocks softly so as not to wake the house. Ayan opened his eyes slowly. A golden shaft of light cut through the gap in the roof, casting a long line across the wooden floorboards. Dust floated in the beam, drifting like silent thoughts. He sat up. The cabin was quiet, undisturbed, but the memory of the knock lingered like a scent, faint but real. He stepped outside, scanning the forest edge. Nothing stirred, just the soft rhythm of birdsong and the steady hush of leaves shifting overhead. Ayan whispered Alhamdulillah and made wudu from a tin bowl he'd found under the shelf. The water was cold, but it woke something peaceful in him. After Fajr, he sat outside the cabin, legs folded, his hands open in dua, not asking for anything specific, just presence. Just the ability to listen better, feel deeper. Behind him, inside the old structure, the silence had changed. It no longer felt abandoned, it felt watched over, as if the prayers whispered here had not been forgotten. After a simple meal, Ayan decided to explore the inside more carefully. He returned to the corner shelf, the cloth bundle, the leather pouch. This time, he unrolled the cloth gently. Inside, a few folded papers, yellowed and fragile with time. Arabic script, handwritten. Some Quranic reflections, and at the bottom a name. Hassan ibn Suleiman, his father's teacher. A man Ayan had only heard about once in passing, when his father had shared stories of studying in the mountains during his youth. Hassan was a recluse, his father said. A man who had traded the world's noise for the silence of trees. He taught with presence more than words. Ayan had never thought him real, until now. He looked around. This was Hassan's cabin, his sanctuary, and somehow Ayan had found it. Or rather, been led to it. Inside the leather pouch, a small compass. But this one was unlike Ayan's own. Its needle moved slowly with deliberate grace. Around its rim, Arabic calligraphy had been etched with care. Indeed, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. Quran 3:28. Ayan held it in his palm for a while, watching the needle settle. It pointed not north, but toward the Qibla, a prayer compass, a quiet tool for a quiet life. He decided to stay another night, but not in idleness. He began clearing the surrounding area, sweeping the fallen leaves, stacking small stones to mark a path, gathering bits of wood. Not for comfort, but out of respect, as if honoring what had been left behind. Near the back of the cabin, behind a thicket, he discovered a small stone marker, almost invisible beneath moss and roots. He knelt beside it and brushed the moss away. A name, faint but still readable, Hassan ibn Suleiman. So he had passed here, alone perhaps, but not forgotten. Ayan sat by the grave for a long time, not mourning but reflecting. He thought of how some people chose lives not of retreat but of depth. People who stepped away not to run but to return. He recited Surah Al-Fatiha, then Yasin, his voice gentle and slow. O Allah, grant him light in his grave and ease in his resting. Accept from him the worship no one saw but you. By nightfall, the forest had wrapped itself in blue and silver. Stars peeked through the trees and a soft mist crept over the ground. Ayan lit the lantern once more and placed it in the doorway. Its glow painted the cabin walls in amber and shadow. Inside, he wrote in the notebook, I did not find a man, I found his prayers, and somehow they remembered me. He closed the book and sat by the fireless hearth wrapped in his shawl. The forest didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a page still being written. And then, footsteps again. This time, closer. He stepped outside, heart steady. From between two trees, a figure emerged. A young man his age, dressed simply, with a walking stick in hand and a satchel on his shoulder. They regarded one another for a moment. The stranger spoke first. "I've been following the trees," he said. His voice was soft, calm. Ayan nodded. "So was I." The man looked past him at the cabin. "Is this it?" Ayan looked over his shoulder. "Yes." The man smiled gently. Then, "May I sit?" Ayan stepped aside and gestured toward the stone outside the door. The two sat in silence for a while, not awkwardly, just two travelers in shared stillness. The stranger spoke again, this time slower. "My teacher once told me, you'll find it when you're no longer searching to possess it. I didn't understand, until I saw this place." Ayan glanced at him. "What was your teacher's name?" The man looked up at the stars. "Hassan ibn Suleiman." A breeze passed between them. No more words were needed that night. They sat until the stars were heavy above, two strangers drawn by the echo of someone who had left nothing behind, except light. The morning light found them both seated just outside the cabin, where the grass grew soft and the trees offered a slow-moving shade. Ayan and the stranger, whose name he'd now learned was Idris, had prayed Fajr together before dawn. The shared silence between them wasn't heavy. It was full. Ayan had always thought solitude was meant to be quiet. But in Idris's company, he realized something deeper. Some silences are shared without needing to be explained. Idris was different. He didn't speak unless words were necessary. He smiled often, but never in a way that begged attention. His movements were slow and deliberate, as though his time in the forest had taught him how not to rush. They sat with warm tea, brewed over a soft fire Idris had kindled from twigs he gathered silently just after dawn. "I didn't think I'd meet anyone here," Ayan said, watching the steam rise. "I didn't think anyone else would follow the old path," Idris replied gently. "People don't usually look for places that don't promise anything." Ayan stirred the tea with a twig, thoughtful. "But what if they promise everything, just in a different language?" Idris glanced at him, and for the first time his smile lingered. They spent the morning tending to the cabin's surroundings. Idris patched a corner of the wall using rope and bark, while Ayan worked to clear a second small path from the stream to the cabin. No one asked the other to do anything. It was as if each knew what needed doing, like a rhythm already known. As they worked, Idris began to share, slowly, like water from a narrow-necked jug. "I came here 4 months ago," he said. "I'd lost someone, and I thought I was losing myself." Ayan didn't ask who. "I remembered something my teacher once told me. That healing doesn't always happen in the place you were wounded. Sometimes it needs a new earth, a different sky." Ayan nodded. He understood. They paused for dur and prayed under a nearby tree where the branches formed a kind of canopy. Afterward, Ayan shared his own story. The notebook, the map, the markings on trees, the strange symbol. The voice of the forest that had slowly begun to feel like home. "I don't think I came here by accident," he said quietly. "No one does," Idris replied. "This place doesn't call to those who aren't listening." That evening, Idris brought out something he had kept hidden in his satchel, a collection of papers bound in cloth. Reflections, poems, even letters he had written but never sent. He read a few aloud, his voice calm and measured. One stayed with Ayan. "We left the world not to escape it, but to remind ourselves it was never ours. The sky is not rented, the breath is not earned, and silence is not empty." That night they decided to sleep under the stars. 2 shawls laid on the mossy ground, a fire between them, small and warm. Above, the stars were bright, thousands of them flickering like old memories returning to say salam. The forest seemed to settle into its own kind of prayer. Ayan turned to Idris. "Do you think he knew we'd come here, Hassan?" "I think," Idris said slowly, "that he planted something long ago. Not a tree, but a stillness. And we arrived when it was time to sit beneath its shade." There was no need for more words. As the fire faded and their eyes grew heavy, Ayan whispered quietly into the dark, "O Allah, let me never forget what stillness taught me." In the middle of the night, Ayan stirred slightly. Something subtle had changed. The wind had stopped, no breeze, no rustle. He sat up gently. The forest was utterly still, not dead, just waiting. And then, a sound, soft like fabric moving over stone. He turned toward the trees just past the reach of the firelight. There, just barely visible, a figure, standing, unmoving, not Idris, not a threat, something else. Cloaked in white, faintly luminous in the moonlight, too distant to see clearly, but present. Ayan didn't rise. He simply bowed his head slightly and closed his eyes. By the time he opened them again, the figure was gone, but the silence had changed again. Not emptiness, not mystery. Just the kind of quiet that comes after something sacred has passed through. He looked over at Idris, who was still sleeping, undisturbed. Ayan lay back down, hands folded over his chest, and the sky above seemed to pulse with meaning. The morning after the silent vision, the air carried a strange stillness, like the world had been reset. Dew clung to every surface, from blades of grass to the faded rooftop of the cabin. The fire from the night before had become nothing but faint ash, glowing like the final whisper of a prayer. Ayan sat up, the memory of the white-cloaked figure still gently woven into his thoughts. Was it a dream, a vision he didn't need an answer? Sometimes what visits you in silence doesn't come to be explained. It comes to be honored. Idris stirred beside him, rubbed his eyes, and sat cross-legged without a word. The two shared a quiet breakfast of dates and bread, dipped in olive oil from Idris's small jar. Then Idris spoke softly without looking up. "You saw something last night." Ayan blinked. "You were awake?" he asked. "No. But I felt it. Something passed through the trees, something gentle." Ayan nodded. "I don't know what it was, but it didn't feel like fear. It felt like mercy." Idris smiled faintly. "That sounds like him." The conversation ended there, and yet so much had been said. After Duha prayer, Ayan retrieved the notebook. He sat inside the cabin alone for a while, letting the silence guide his pen. He wrote not to understand, but to witness. There is something sacred in stillness. It doesn't answer. It doesn't explain, but it reminds, and that reminder is enough. Later that day, the forest called again, not with urgency, but with invitation. A soft rhythm in the wind, a particular bend in the path outside the clearing, as if the trees themselves were saying, "You have rested, now walk." Ayan and Idris stood at the cabin's edge. Ayan glanced back once more. "It feels wrong to leave it," he said. Idris adjusted his satchel and nodded. "That's how you know it gave you something. They didn't mark the trail. They didn't try to preserve the moment. They just walked forward, knowing the way back would not be needed. The forest welcomed them not as strangers, but as those who had learned to listen. The light moved in gold between the branches. Small creatures darted between bushes. Even the breeze seemed to walk with them, pausing when they paused, continuing when they stepped forward. For some time, they walked without speaking. Then Idris asked, "What's next for you, Ayan? I don't know." He replied truthfully, "I thought it was about finding where my father had gone. Now I think I'm starting to find where I was meant to arrive." Idris nodded slowly. "Sometimes we follow a person but find ourselves." Ayan turned to him, and Idris smiled. "I think I've seen enough of silence to share it now. Maybe teach what Hassan taught. Maybe just listen when someone else speaks." The path eventually sloped downward toward a small stream, gently weaving through rocks and wildflowers. They stopped there for Asr, the sound of water trickling beside them like the softest dicker. After prayer, Ayan dipped his hands in the stream, letting the cold water awaken his fingers. On a flat stone nearby, someone had etched something, old, barely legible. Idris leaned closer and read aloud. When the heart no longer seeks shelter from the storm, it becomes the sky. They sat there for a long time. As the sun dipped lower, they came upon an old wooden archway. Not a building, just two beams forming a gateway. It stood in the middle of the forest with no walls, no path leading in or out. Almost forgotten. But Ayan knew better. He stepped toward it and placed his hand on the wood. There were markings again. Faint, the same symbol, circle, and inside the eye. Idris stepped beside him, a gentle realization dawning in both their eyes. "This is a door," Idris said quietly. "To what?" Ayan didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped through the archway. Nothing changed. No sudden noise, no burst of light. But inside, something shifted. A veil within. He turned back and saw Idris still on the other side. "Come," he said, his voice calm. Idris stepped forward, and as soon as he crossed, a low sound rippled through the trees. Not frightening, just new, like the forest recognizing something ancient. The air was cooler here, the trees taller, the sky just a little dimmer, though no clouds had moved in. They walked until they came upon a clearing, different from any before. In the center stood a stone pillar, no higher than a man's waist. Upon it, a book, bound in deep green leather, untouched, preserved by something unseen. Ayan stepped forward, hands shaking, not in fear but awe. He opened it. Inside, pages filled with handwriting, not his father's, not Hassan's, but Idris's eyes widened in recognition. "These are my letters," he whispered, "the ones I left behind, in caves, under trees, by rivers. I thought they were lost." Ayan turned the page. There in the margin was a new note, written recently in his father's handwriting. "To those who find this, you are not here by chance. You are the bridge between what and what is becoming." Ayan closed the book. Silence settled again. But this time, it was not empty. The forest no longer felt like a wilderness, not to Ayan, not to Idris. It had become a passage, alive, listening, remembering. Every rustle of the trees felt like it was speaking their name softly, the way a mother whispers to a sleeping child. They sat by the stone pillar for a long time, neither touching the book again. Some things are not meant to be consumed quickly. Some truths are meant to rest with you first, to hum quietly inside the chest before they rise into the mind. Ayan stared into the distance, his voice barely above the wind. "He was here," he said. "Not long ago." Idris nodded slowly. "Yes. My father. He passed through this place." They didn't speak of what it meant. They didn't ask where he'd gone next. That knowledge would come when it was ready. Instead, they listened. The forest spoke in small ways. Through the way a bird returned to its branch, through the way a leaf fell with perfect timing, landing at their feet. Ayan reached for it, lifting it gently. There was a symbol on it, not carved, not painted. Just the natural veins of the leaf forming the same circle and eye they had seen again and again. Idris smiled as if it was no surprise. "It's everywhere now," he said. "The mark of remembrance." They began to walk again, not aimlessly, but without needing to know the exact direction. Their steps took them deeper where the trees grew older. Some trunks were wide enough that 5 men holding hands could barely wrap around them. The bark was thick, gnarled, and filled with tiny cracks, like the wrinkles of an elder's face who had spent a lifetime in sujud. It began to rain softly. No thunder, no lightning. Just a hush, as if the sky itself needed to cleanse its thoughts. They took shelter beneath a curved tree whose limbs formed a natural arch. Idris spread out a cloth and they sat close, listening to the rhythm of the droplets. Ayan reached into his satchel and pulled out the compass, the one he had found in Hassan's cabin. The needle still pointed, not north but toward the Qibla. He placed it on the cloth between them. Even in the middle of nowhere, he said, "It remembers." Idris turned to him, his expression calm. "So should we." They prayed Maghrib there, under the soft pattering of rain, and as the call to prayer echoed only within their own hearts, the trees stood silently in congregation with them. That night they built no fire. They didn't need warmth. The forest had become familiar now, like an old friend who simply sat beside you, needing no words. Ayan closed his eyes. The dreams came quickly, but this time, they weren't dreams. They were memories he didn't know he had. His father's voice reciting dua over a small fire. His mother whispering, "Sabir, my son, always Sabir." The scent of books in their home. The quiet pages of old Qurans wrapped in cloth, kissed before being opened. He woke just before Fajr, tears drying on his cheek. Idris was already awake, sitting in stillness with his hands open in dua. They prayed together. As their foreheads touched the cool forest floor, time seemed to pause. The ground beneath them, the sky above them, and the breath between them all felt connected, as if the entire universe was in sujud alongside them. After the sun rose, they came upon a fork in the path. Two trails, one winding upward into high ridges and pale light, the other dipping downward into mist and shadow. They stopped. Idris looked toward the high trail. "This is where I go," he said, with no sadness in his tone. Ayan looked at the lower trail. Somehow he knew. "So this is where we part," he said softly. They stood silently for a moment, the weight of their shared journey resting gently between them. Idris placed a hand on Ayan's shoulder. "You walk with light now," he said. "And the world needs light in its valleys, and you?" Ayan asked. "I'll bring it to the mountain," Idris replied with a calm smile. They embraced briefly like brothers who would meet again, not in this world perhaps, but in the prayers they left behind. Ayan watched as Idris walked upward, disappearing slowly between the trees. He turned to the misted trail before him. There was no fear, only remembrance. He began to walk. Each step forward echoed softly, as though the forest itself acknowledged his decision. He passed by small signs carved into tree bark, verses in Arabic script, duas half faded, symbols etched gently like signatures of travelers who had walked with prayer on their lips. Here, the forest was quieter. Here, even the wind stepped softly. He paused by a moss-covered log and sat, took out the notebook, opened to a blank page, and then in calm handwriting he wrote, "There are no wrong paths for the one who walks with Dicker, only lessons shaped like turns and guidance in the fog." The mist began to lift slightly, revealing glimpses of what lay ahead, not a destination, but a continuation. And Ayan, lighter now, quieter inside, rose once more and walked into it. The mist parted slowly as Ayan descended further into the forest valley. The air was cooler here, like it had been untouched by time. Trees stood tall and solemn, their branches gently swaying like they were remembering something from long ago. The ground beneath his feet was soft with moss and layers of fallen leaves. His footsteps made no sound. He walked with his hands open, no longer searching, just receiving. Every breath felt deliberate. Every blink felt like a prayer. For hours, or maybe days, he couldn't be sure, he walked alone. But it wasn't a lonely silence. It was the silence of tawakkul, trust. He came upon a clearing shaped like a crescent moon. In the center, a stone bench, aged and smooth, as though many had sat here before him. On the bench lay a single item, a wooden bowl half filled with rainwater. Ayan sat down beside it. He didn't drink. He just watched the way the water trembled gently in the breeze, forming tiny ripples that reached the edges and disappeared. Sometimes, Allah sends signs that don't speak. They just are. He remembered a story his mother once told him as a boy. "There is a valley," she had said, "where the answers are not given in words, they're given in waiting and sitting." in being still until the heart is quiet enough to hear without ears. He hadn't known what she meant back then. Now he did. So he stayed. Not out of confusion, but out of trust. He prayed, he rested, he wrote in the notebook, and he let the valley teach him. At times impatience stirred. Shouldn't I be moving? Shouldn't I be searching? But each time he stood, a stillness in his chest asked him to sit again, and so he did. One morning, just after Fajr, he opened the notebook and found a page he hadn't written. At first he thought he was mistaken, but no. There it was, soft handwriting, familiar. It was his father's. "My son, if you find this, know that I waited here too. I waited until my asking became surrender. I waited until my tears turned into trust. I waited until the path appeared beneath my feet. Not because I found it, but because I stopped needing to." Ayan closed the book gently and held it to his chest. The sun rose higher, casting golden light through the leaves. Birdsong returned. A soft breeze carried scents of wild herbs and damp earth, and then he saw it. A path. Faint, narrow, but clear. Had it always been there? Or had it appeared when he was ready to walk it? He didn't ask. He just stood, brushed off the moss from his clothes, and began to walk. The path led him gently upward through canopies that glowed in the morning light. His footsteps were steadier now, not urgent, not aimless, just present. By midday, he reached a ridge overlooking a wide expanse of forest. From there, he could see the distant line of mountains, a reminder that there was always more beyond the horizon. At the ridge stood a small structure, half shelter, half shrine. Wooden beams open on all sides with a woven mat laid neatly in the center. No walls, just shade, silence, and the scent of sandalwood. Inside, a lantern hung from a hook unlit. Beside it, another note, this one newer, folded. Ayan opened it. It read, "If you are reading this, then you are still walking with your heart. Light the lantern only when you no longer need it, then rest. The next guide will find you." He smiled softly. So he did not light the lantern. Instead, he sat in its shadow and waited again, not in passivity, but in peace. Maghrib came, and as the sun dipped behind the hills, the first star appeared. He watched it flicker like a tiny voice saying, "You are not lost, you are being led." That night, Ayan didn't dream. Instead, he simply rested, fully, deeply, like the soul does when it finally stops searching for something it already carries within. The stars faded quietly as dawn crept into the sky, soft and gray. Ayan awoke to the sound of wind weaving gently through the trees. Not a single leaf rustled in haste. It was the kind of morning that moved like dua, slow and sincere. He sat up under the wooden shelter and stretched his arms. The world smelled of damp soil and wood smoke, even though no fire had been lit. The lantern above him swayed slightly, but still he did not light it. He wasn't ready to announce his readiness. Not yet. A bird landed at the edge of the structure, a small one, feathers gray with a shimmer of blue on its wings. It chirped once, then flew off, scattering a few dry leaves as it lifted. Beneath those leaves was something small. Ayan leaned over and picked it up, a piece of old cloth tied at the corners. He unfolded it carefully. Inside was a smooth stone, polished flat, with a verse etched into it in delicate script. "And whoever puts their trust in Allah, He is sufficient for them." On Surah At-Talaq 65:3. Ayan traced the verse with his thumb, heart stilled by its timing. How many times had this ayah passed his ears unnoticed? Now it had reached him in the form of something tangible, quiet and clear. He placed the stone in the inner pocket of his satchel, the one he reserved for things that felt like prayers. Then, without waiting for a sign, he stood up. The path was waiting. He walked through early light with the verse still whispering in his chest. The trees felt different now, not larger or smaller, not darker or lighter, but closer, as if they too had heard the ayah and stood a little taller because of it. He passed small markers along the path, an old scarf tied to a branch, a stack of balanced stones, a small book wedged into a hollow, each one a quiet message from travelers before him. He stopped at the book, It was thin, handmade, the cover soft and worn. He opened it and read the first page. There was no name, just a line. If you have found this, then you too have listened long enough to hear. He turned the next page and found something unexpected. A sketch. It was a drawing of the cabin where he had first met Idris, detailed, familiar, exact. Page after page followed with more sketches, places Ayan had walked through. The pillar with the green-bound book, the archway, the crescent clearing, but then, the final page. A place he hadn't seen, yet. A round room made of stone open to the sky. At its center, a shallow well. And sitting beside the well, an open Quran. Ayan stared at the drawing for a long time. Then he gently closed the book and tucked it into his satchel. By now the sun had risen fully, not harsh but golden, casting long beams of light between the trees like fingers pointing gently ahead. He continued walking. By midday he arrived at a grove where the trees stood in a circle, evenly spaced. The light here had a stillness to it, as though time slowed slightly upon entering. At the center of the grove stood a man. He was older, with a beard the color of stone and snow, and robes the color of sand. His back was straight, his hands behind him, eyes on the sky. Ayan paused at the edge. The man did not speak, but he smiled without turning. I wondered how long it would take, the man said finally. Ayan stepped forward slowly. Do I know you? The man turned now. His eyes were calm, steady. No, but you know what I've guarded. He stepped aside. And behind him, in the very center of the grove, was the room. Not just like the drawing, exactly like it. Stone walls, open ceiling, round shape. And in the middle, the well. Beside it, the Quran. Ayan didn't rush forward. He walked with reverence, his breath slowing with every step. When he reached the well, he looked inside, clear water undisturbed, reflecting the sky perfectly. Then he sat beside it, cross-legged, facing the open Quran. It was open to a page he recognized instantly. Surah Yusuf. A story of patience, of loss and return, of dreams interpreted and prayers answered in time, not quickly but perfectly. He didn't read aloud. He simply looked. And in that moment, the ache in his chest, the one that had followed him through forest and valley and silence, began to soften. Not disappear, just soften. The man sat across from him on the other side of the well. No one leaves this place the same, he said gently. They don't always get answers, but they leave with something more important. What's that? Ayan asked, his voice calm. The man smiled. Clarity, peace, the kind that doesn't need answers. They sat like that for what felt like hours. As the sun began to lower, the man stood. The path will show itself tomorrow. And then, quietly, he walked into the trees and disappeared. Ayan sat alone now. But the loneliness had changed. It had turned into presence. He watched the sky fade, stars returning one by one. He didn't ask for dreams that night. As he lay beneath the vast expanse of the open sky, an enveloping silence descended, cocooning him in comfort. The soothing hum of nature whispered around him, offering a familiar embrace akin to a cherished dua. Time seemingly paused, allowing his thoughts to drift freely like clouds overhead. In this tranquil moment, life's complexities faded away, leaving only pure serenity and a profound sense of belonging. Morning returned without sound. No birdsong, no breeze, just the quiet light of a sky slowly lifting its veil. Ayan stirred beneath the open heavens, eyes blinking into the gold-washed sky. The stone room was cool, and the well beside him reflected the softness of the new day. He rose slowly as one does after deep rest, stretching not just his body but his spirit. The Quran still lay open beside the well. Surah Yusuf. The same ayah met his eyes. Indeed, he who fears Allah and is patient, then indeed Allah does not allow to be lost the reward of those who do good. 1290. He closed the book gently, kissing the edge with his forehead, and then he stood. The man from yesterday was gone. But in his place at the edge of the grove stood a path. This one was not hidden, not subtle, not faint. It was clear, defined, as though it had waited for him to become the person who could finally walk it. Ayan stepped forward, not quickly, not with urgency, but with quiet readiness. The forest greeted him like a companion. Leaves swayed gently and the wind whispered, not in riddles this time, but in comfort. He was not being tested now. He was being guided. Around midday he heard something new, familiar, a stream. The sound of water rushing gently over rocks, steady and clean. He followed it and found himself at the edge of a riverbank. And across that river a dirt path curved between soft hills. He recognized the trail. It was the one near his village. Home. He hadn't thought of it in so long, not with longing or urgency, but now it called to him with a soft smile. He cupped water in his hands and washed his face. He looked into the stream. His reflection was still his, but different. His eyes carried silence now, not emptiness, space. He crossed the river barefoot, the cold water biting, then fading. On the other side, the ground felt warmer. He walked until he saw rooftops, laundry lines, children's laughter, a familiar fig tree, and finally, his mother's home. Ayan stood quietly at the gate. The door opened before he could knock. His mother stood there, older than he remembered, but somehow unchanged. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She just smiled, like she had been expecting him all along. He stepped inside, and she set warm tea before him without a word. It tasted like memory. That evening, as the sky turned dusky purple, he sat outside beneath the fig tree, notebook in hand. He turned to a blank page and wrote, "I went looking for answers, and I found questions that gave me peace. I went seeking the path, and I found that the path was already walking with me. I followed signs, and I became one. Days passed, or maybe weeks. But Ayan didn't need to count time anymore. He helped tend the garden. He taught Quran to children. He listened more than he spoke. He smiled without needing a reason. And every so often he would walk to the edge of the forest, the same place he had once disappeared into, not to leave again, but to remind himself that the forest was still there, that stillness was always available. One day, while sweeping the courtyard, a young traveler passed through the village. Dust-covered, curious-eyed, carrying a satchel much like Ayan once had. The boy asked for water. Ayan gave him tea. They spoke for a while, about maps, about missing things, about dreams. And as the boy stood to leave, Ayan said, "Wait." He went inside and returned with a small object wrapped in cloth. He handed it to the boy. "Open it when the path grows quiet," he said with a kind smile. The boy nodded and left, disappearing down the same trail Ayan had once walked. And that night, as Ayan sat beneath the stars once more, he smiled gently to himself. Not because the journey had ended, but because he finally understood. There is no end to a path walked with dhikr, only turns, only invitations, only more chances to remember. He closed his eyes. The wind carried the echo of leaves and rivers and unseen duas, and somewhere far beyond what could be seen, another soul took their first step into the forest, where silence speaks, where answers wait without hurry, and where the heart, when it's ready, finally hears the whisper, "You were never lost, you were being returned." Story number 2. Whispers of the Desert Wind. The sun was low on the horizon, casting golden light over the vast open desert, where sand dunes rose and fell like gentle waves frozen in time. The air was dry but not hostile. There was a warmth to it, like a silent companion guiding the soul gently into reflection. Yusuf tightened the strap on his simple canvas satchel, the only bag he had carried for this quiet journey. He wasn't fleeing nor chasing. He was simply searching. For what? He wasn't entirely sure. But something had stirred in his heart months ago, a quiet whisper that told him there was more to discover, not in the noise of the world, but in its silence. He had left the city behind, its loudness, its concrete routines, its demands, and found himself now on the edge of the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter. But to him, it didn't feel empty. The desert had a soul. It moved slowly, like breathing. He could almost feel it. A gentle breeze rolled past, carrying with it the scent of sun-warmed sand and dry acacia. Somewhere in the distance, a bird cried, soft, distant, like a memory calling him home. Yusuf adjusted his light scarf, the keffiyeh wrapped neatly around his head and neck, shielding him from the sun. The horizon stretched endlessly, but he had learned not to fear such openness. When he was younger, the idea of being alone frightened him. Now it comforted him. Here he could hear his own thoughts, unrushed, unbothered. He could hear duas whispered from the heart, not the tongue. And maybe if he remained still enough, he might even hear the answer. That first evening, Yusuf found a gentle slope where the dune curved like a cradle. He laid his mat, offered Maghrib in the direction of the Qibla, the desert wind brushing against him like a lullaby. He recited quietly, each verse anchoring his heart deeper into peace. Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum. The verses felt more alive here. Later he opened a small pouch of dates and sipped from his water flask. He had planned wisely. Rationing was important. Not because he expected to run out, but because he had come to learn the value of balance in all things. As the stars began to appear, scattered like diamonds across the darkening sky, Yusuf lay back and breathed in the serenity. There was no rush, no deadline. Just the rhythm of nightfall and the quiet comfort of surrendering to Allah's vast creation. He had mapped a route loosely, mostly by the stars, some marked oases and stories he had heard from Bedouins. But more than that, he trusted in tawakkul. In the quiet spaces of life, when the noise fades, that's when trust truly begins. That night, sleep came gently, like the soft embrace of a mother to her child. No thoughts pulled at him. No worries stirred the stillness. Only the sound of shifting sand and the promise of a new dawn. The first light of dawn was soft and blue, a quiet prelude before the warmth of day returned. Yusuf stirred gently, his eyes opening to the sky above, still holding the last few stars like forgotten thoughts from a dream. He sat up slowly, brushing grains of sand from his cloak. The desert, though quiet through the night, never slept completely. It breathed, it listened, and now it awakened with him. Facing the horizon, Yusuf performed wudu with care, using just enough water, mindful not to waste. The coolness refreshed his skin, reminding him of the blessing in every drop. As he stood to pray, his feet grounded in the sand, he felt connected, not just to the earth, but to something greater, something timeless. After Fajr, Yusuf wrapped his scarf again and walked toward a small rise in the dunes. There he stood and looked out at the vast flowing canvas of amber and gold. He remembered the words of an old traveler he once met at a masjid in Al Ain. In the desert, the land does not guide you. Allah does. It was not long before he spotted faint traces, tiny indentations winding through the sand. A trail, not made by people but perhaps by desert foxes or a lone gazelle. Even here life found its way. Yusuf smiled. There was comfort in that. With a steady pace he began walking again, the morning sun warming his back. His goal today was not to reach a destination but to keep moving, to keep trusting. As he walked, he hummed softly, a tune his mother used to sing while preparing breakfast in their small home back in Nizwa. The melody wove through the air, weaving memories into the present. Around midday, the sun stood high, and Yusuf found a small patch of shade beneath a rock outcrop. A single desert shrub clung to life nearby, its roots hidden beneath the sands. He sat there, drank from his flask, and let his eyes close for a while. The heat was calm, not cruel. It reminded him to slow down. In the stillness, Yusuf reflected on the life he had left behind, not out of regret but gratitude. The noise of the world had been loud, but here, in silence, he could hear what really mattered. When he opened his eyes again, a soft rustling caught his attention. He turned and saw a small lizard sunning itself nearby. Its eyes blinked slowly, unbothered by his presence. Yusuf chuckled softly. "You and I," he whispered, "were both just passing through." By late afternoon, he resumed his walk. The shadows grew longer, the sand cooler underfoot. A distant mountain range began to take shape ahead, painted in soft purples and grays. He hadn't planned to go that far yet, but the sight was welcoming, like a gentle invitation. As evening drew near, he found a shallow dip in the dunes and set down his mat. The air was crisp now, scented faintly with dry herbs carried from who knows where. After prayer, he read from a small mushaf he kept wrapped in cloth. The pages were worn, but their message never faded. That night, as he lay beneath the stars, Yusuf whispered a dua. "Ya Rab, guide me not where I wish to go, but where I am needed." The wind brushed against his cheek as if in reply. Sleep came again, not heavy but light, like resting in the hand of something far bigger than himself. And as he drifted off, the desert whispered its ancient secrets to him, in a language only the heart could understand. The night passed quietly, as if the earth itself had paused to listen. When Yusuf opened his eyes, the sky above was a deep indigo, sprinkled with stars slowly fading into morning light. He lay still for a moment, letting his breathing match the rhythm of the wind moving through the dunes. He rose gently, not rushing the moment. Every action in the desert felt sacred. Every stretch, every breath, even the simple act of folding his prayer mat. It was strange how little one needed to feel content. A piece of cloth, a direction to face, a heart turned upward. After Fajr, Yusuf sat on a small rise, sipping the last of his morning water ration. He had enough left for a few more days, but he knew it was time to reach an oasis. Not out of urgency, Allah would provide, but preparation was part of shukr. Gratitude and planning went hand in hand. Looking eastward, he noticed something faint on the horizon. It wasn't a shape or sound, more like a feeling. A softness in the air, a different color in the sand, perhaps a change in terrain. He rose, adjusted his keffiyeh, and began walking in that direction with calm purpose. The dunes shifted subtly under his feet. Each step was slow, thoughtful, his eyes scanning the landscape not with anxiety but with gentle awareness. Yusuf had learned not to force his way through nature. You listened, you watched, you walked with it, not against it. Mid-morning brought a gift. As he crested a dune, he saw it, a date palm in the distance, just one. But where there is one, there is often more. His heart lifted, but he did not rush. He continued steadily, reciting soft dhikr under his breath, the repetition easing both body and soul. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. It became like a rhythm with his steps, not out of fear but presence. The single palm soon became a cluster, and beside it, a shallow pool of water fed by a spring hidden beneath the sands. Yusuf smiled, kneeling by the edge. He cupped the water in his hands, bringing it to his lips slowly. It was cool, sweet, and tasted of relief. He performed wudu again, letting the water run over his hands, his face, his feet. There was something about water in the desert. It reminded you how even the smallest mercy from Allah was enough to change your entire state. Resting in the shade of the palms, Yusuf allowed himself a short nap. The leaves above whispered gently with the wind, and the earth beneath him felt soft with promise. He dreamed of nothing, just peace, just breath, just stillness. When he woke, the sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows over the oasis. He explored gently, finding a few clusters of wild herbs and tiny flowers blooming near the water. Life, hidden, waiting patiently, just like him. That evening, as he prepared for prayer, he noticed something in the distance, a soft, flickering light. Not a star, too low, not fire. It danced differently. It was a lantern, far away, across the dunes, a traveler perhaps, or a small camp. He watched it for a long time, not sure whether to approach or wait. But something in his heart told him, this was written. So after prayer, he sat quietly watching the light. It didn't move, it simply glowed. A reminder perhaps that in the vastest places we are never truly alone, that even in solitude Allah places signs, comforts for those who look. Yusuf lay down, his eyes on the horizon. The lantern remained like a star left behind, waiting for morning. He whispered another dua. Ya Rab, guide my steps as you guide the stars. Quietly, but surely, the night deepened, and once again the desert embraced him like an old friend, lulling him to sleep with silence more comforting than words. Yusuf awoke before the sun. The stars were still above, gentle witnesses to the stillness around him. The flickering lantern in the distance remained steady as before. Not closer, not gone, just waiting. He rose, his body light from restful sleep, and performed wudu from the clear spring, savoring the coolness on his skin. With the soft brush of sand beneath his feet, he stood for Fajr, facing the Qibla, surrounded by palms and birds just beginning their morning praise. The silence of the prayer matched the stillness in his heart. Afterward, Yusuf prepared his satchel. He didn't need to decide whether to go toward the light. It had already become part of his path. Sometimes signs come not as thunder, but as subtle, quiet invitations. And if your heart is soft enough, you'll feel them. The sun was still low when he set off. The dunes bathed in rose and gold. The lantern, though faint now, still pointed ahead. He kept his pace gentle. The desert did not reward haste. He paused often, not to rest but to notice. The tracks of a beetle, the distant call of a hawk, a cracked shell from some creature's forgotten meal. By mid-morning, the ground shifted. No longer soft dunes, but firmer earth with scattered pebbles and dry grass. A sign of change. Yusuf remembered the old wisdom. Where the land hardens, footsteps become clearer. And then around a shallow bend of stone and sand he saw it. A tent, modest cream-colored fabric aged by wind and sun, pitched neatly beside a low tree. Smoke rose softly from a small clay fire pit. And there, just beside it, sat an old man wrapped in a thick brown cloak, his hand steady as he poured tea into a tin cup. He looked up as Yusuf approached. His face, lined but calm, held no surprise, only warmth like he had been expecting him. "Assalamu alaikum," Yusuf offered gently. "Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah," the man replied with a smile. "I saw your fire last night." Yusuf blinked, confused. "My fire?" The old man chuckled. "It's what I call a soul on its way to where it belongs. The kind of light that only shows in the heart, not the sky." Yusuf sat as invited, the fire between them crackling softly. The tea was fragrant, steeped with herbs that tasted of desert wind and hidden gardens. He drank slowly, not needing to speak. The man didn't ask questions, and Yusuf didn't offer stories. Not yet. Here, silence wasn't awkward. It was honored. Finally, the man spoke, voice low and steady. "This place has been quiet for many years. Most pass by. Few stop." "Why?" Yusuf asked. "Because it's easier to follow maps than signs." He looked up, meeting Yusuf's eyes. "But you're not looking for direction, you're looking for meaning." Yusuf didn't reply. He didn't need to. The man saw it. Somehow he knew. They spoke little that day. They gathered small herbs, shared dried dates, refilled water flasks from a stone basin covered by a cloth. The tent offered shade, and time moved gently. At sunset, they prayed side by side, two figures silhouetted against a sky painted with gold. And when the stars returned, Yusuf asked, "Do you live here alone?" The man smiled. "Only when no one visits." That night, Yusuf lay beneath the open sky once more, but he did not sleep right away. He listened to the fire crackle softly, the wind hum through the tree, the quiet breath of a man who had mastered stillness. Before sleep came, Yusuf whispered into the night, "Ya Rab, send me the companions I need. Whether they speak or remain silent, let them guide me to you." And the stars above, timeless and unmoving, bore witness to a prayer that had already been answered. The morning came slow and soft, like a page turning in a gentle breeze. Yusuf awoke to the aroma of warm tea and firewood. The sky overhead was a pale blue, the kind that invites reflection more than action. The old man was already sitting beside the fire, his cloak wrapped loosely around his shoulders. He didn't look up as Yusuf approached. He didn't need to. His presence, calm and constant, welcomed Yusuf wordlessly. You wake with the sun, the old man said finally, voice deep and easy. Yusuf smiled. She rises on time every day. It seems only respectful. The man chuckled, pouring tea into 2 cups. He handed one to Yusuf and gestured toward the sky. The sun, the wind, the stars, they never rush, yet they never stop moving. They sat in quiet companionship, sipping tea while the fire whispered its low song. Yusuf had learned not to fill silences too quickly. Here in the desert, every pause held meaning. After some time, the old man leaned back, gazing at the far-off line where the land kissed the sky. You remind me of someone, he said. A traveler who once came this way many years ago. Yusuf turned slightly. What brought him here? A question, the man replied. Same as you. Yusuf waited. He was younger than you, restless, thought he had to prove something to the world. So he came walking into this land thinking the desert would challenge him, break him maybe. Did it? Yusuf asked. In a way, the man nodded, but not how he expected. The wind shifted gently, tugging at the edge of the tent. The old man continued, his voice slow, as though recalling the memory not from his mind but his bones. He stayed a few days. Didn't speak much, just sat, prayed, listened to the sand. One morning he asked me, "Why does it feel like nothing happens here?" The old man smiled, eyes crinkling with the memory. And I told him, "Because you're listening with the wrong ears." Yusuf looked down, thoughtful. The desert doesn't speak like people do, the man went on. It teaches through quiet, through stillness. If you want to hear its lessons, you have to let go of noise, even the noise in your mind. Yusuf nodded slowly. He had felt it too, that strange clarity that only came when everything else was stripped away. What happened to him? He asked. The man stared into the fire for a long moment. He left one morning before sunrise, didn't say goodbye, just disappeared over the horizon. Yusuf waited. There was more, he sensed. I think he found what he was looking for, the man said softly. But not because of me. Because he finally stopped looking outside and started looking inward. A breeze passed, lifting a swirl of sand into the air, as if the land itself had exhaled. Later that day, they collected wood from nearby brush, sharing quiet labor. The old man showed Yusuf how to spot animal tracks, how to read the shifts in sand, how to listen to the sky for signs of weather. But more than that, he showed him the beauty of doing things with presence. That evening, after prayer, they sat again by the fire. The flames danced, casting long shadows over the earth. The stars emerged slowly above them, each one settling into place like a familiar friend returning home. Tomorrow, the old man said, you'll feel the road calling again. Yusuf looked at him, surprised. How do you know? The old man smiled faintly. Because it's time. And when it's time, the heart knows. Yusuf didn't argue. He felt it too, gently growing inside him like the first light of dawn. That night before sleep, Yusuf stared at the sky and whispered, Ya Allah, thank you for those who hold lanterns along the way, even the quiet ones. And sleep came softly again, full of stars, silence, and the quiet knowing that the next step was waiting, just beyond the firelight. At first light, Yusuf stood at the edge of the camp, his satchel ready, prayer mat rolled carefully and tied beneath it. The fire had burned low to glowing embers, and the sky wore a soft gray before dawn. The old man stood beside him, hands folded, eyes watching the horizon. You may not see the road, he said, but the earth remembers where feet have passed. Yusuf nodded. And if I forget the way? The man smiled gently. Then let your heart walk first. Your steps will follow. They embraced briefly, like water passing through hands, present then gone. No need for long farewells. The desert didn't like attachments. It taught you how to let go. Yusuf turned and began walking. He didn't look back. Not out of coldness, but trust. What had been shared would not fade. Some meetings lived on in silence. The terrain shifted again, subtly. The dunes grew smaller, flatter. The ground was firmer beneath his sandals. Scattered stones appeared and the sand held a faint trail, broken lines like old footprints softened by time. By mid-morning he reached a rise overlooking a narrow gorge, a dry wadi snaking through low cliffs. Pale trees with silver bark clung to the edges. Birds circled high above, their calls echoing in the still air. Yusuf descended slowly, his pace thoughtful. The gorge welcomed him with coolness, a change from the dry heat above. In its shadows, wild herbs grew along the edges and small lizards darted between cracks. As he moved through the gorge, something caught his eye. An old marker stone, half buried, etched with fading symbols. Not letters, but patterns, spirals, paths, a trail marker perhaps, left by people long gone. He paused there and rested beneath an overhang of rock. The air cooler, scented with dust and time. He closed his eyes and let his back rest against the stone. The silence here was different, deeper, like a whisper inside the earth. He opened his eyes again when a soft sound reached him. Not wind, not bird, water, not a stream, but a trickle hidden behind the rocks. He followed it carefully and found a small spring, its waters running clear into a shallow pool. Moss clung to the stones nearby, green and soft like something out of a dream. He smiled. After performing wudu, Yusuf prayed beneath the high walls of the gorge. The echoes of his recitation lingered in the air, gentle and steady, as if the cliffs were listening. After prayer, he sat by the spring, drinking slowly, reflecting. He remembered a verse his mother often recited when he was young. And whoever relies upon Allah, then he is sufficient for him. On Surah At-Talaq 65:3. He whispered it aloud as though offering it back to the stones, the water, the sky. The path beyond the spring led through a narrow bend, and as the sun passed its highest point, Yusuf reached a place he hadn't expected. Ruins. Low stone walls, remnants of an old village or way station, lay scattered among the rocks. Faded cloth clung to a broken wooden beam. Clay jars, cracked and moss-covered, sat half-buried in the sand. He walked slowly through the remnants. A well stood at the center, dry now but still firm. A flat stone surface nearby suggested it was once used for prayer. The layout of the stones echoed a masjid, simple, open, facing the right direction. Who had prayed here? He sat on one of the stones, resting his hands on his knees. Around him the wind moved gently, stirring dust into tiny spirals. This place had once been full of voices, children running between walls, women grinding grain, men returning with bundles of herbs or goats. And now, only echoes. But Yusuf didn't feel sadness. He felt reverence. Even silence leaves behind memories, he murmured. He took out his mushaf, the worn pages now colored slightly by sun and time, and began reciting. Not loudly, just enough that the ruins could remember the sound of Quran again. That evening, Yusuf stayed by the old village. He found a sheltered corner and laid out his mat. The stars above blinked into view slowly, like they always did, patient and unchanging. Before sleep, he wrote in a small notebook he carried, notes, thoughts, reflections. One line stayed on the page longer than the rest. Sometimes the places we find were never lost. They were just waiting to be remembered. And with that thought, he drifted into sleep, wrapped in the stillness of stone, the memory of prayer, and the quiet certainty that the path ahead would keep unfolding, one gentle sign at a time. The morning light crept across the stones of the old village, touching the crumbled walls with gold. Yusuf stirred gently, rising before the sun had fully emerged. The ruins were silent but not empty. They held stories, layers of prayer and passing, as if the earth itself remembered. He prayed Fajr in the direction of the old stone platform, letting his voice carry softly into the stillness. And as he folded his mat and gathered his things, he offered a final glance to the quiet village. "May peace remain here," he whispered. The path ahead was uncertain, but Yusuf had stopped fearing uncertainty. It was like the desert wind, It never followed a straight line, yet it always reached where it was meant to go. By mid-morning, the terrain shifted again. Low hills of cracked earth replaced the sand, dotted with dry shrubs and twisted trees. The sun was gentle, filtered by a soft haze, and the wind carried a faint scent of something unfamiliar. Wood smoke, faint but present. Yusuf paused on a ridge, scanning the horizon, and then he saw it. A thin column of smoke curling from behind a rocky rise. He hesitated. Then he remembered the old man's words, "Let your heart walk first." His heart was calm. He walked. The trail led down into a shallow valley where the rocks gave way to a flat patch of earth. There, nestled between stones and trees, was a modest tent, larger than the old man's, made of thick woven fabric. A cooking pot sat above a small fire, and beside it a young girl no older than 10, carefully placed flatbread on a warm stone. She looked up as Yusuf approached, eyes wide but not afraid. A woman stepped from the tent just behind her, her expression cautious but kind. She was veiled, her hands busy with a bundle of herbs. A boy, slightly older than the girl, stood nearby with a stick in hand, watching quietly. Yusuf stopped a respectful distance away. "Assalamu alaikum," he said gently. "Wa alaikum assalam," the woman replied, voice even. "I saw the smoke," Yusuf said. "I didn't mean to intrude." She studied him for a moment. Then with a slight nod, she said, "Come, share tea. A guest is not a burden." He sat with them, his movements careful, humble. The children observed him curiously, whispering to each other now and then. The woman poured tea into clay cups, the aroma familiar and comforting. "We are travelers," she said, "but not in search of anything. We wait." Yusuf looked at her, curious. "For what?" The woman stirred the pot slowly. "For news, for change, for the sky to shift." The boy spoke suddenly. "Baba said we'd move when the stars told us." Yusuf nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like someone who trusts deeply." "He trusted Allah," the woman said, "even when he left." There was a silence. Not heavy, just honest. She offered Yusuf a piece of bread. It was warm, simple, and full of care. As they ate, the children grew more comfortable. The boy showed him a wooden carving he'd made of a bird. The girl brought a pouch of seeds, offering one with pride. The day passed gently in their company. Yusuf helped gather firewood, refill their water from a nearby pool, and listen to the woman hum lullabies under her breath. The tent, though temporary, felt like home. As the sun lowered, the woman spoke again. "You walk alone?" Yusuf nodded. "But I'm not alone." She understood. "Not when you walk with purpose." That evening they prayed together, the woman, Yusuf, and the boy standing beside him, small hands raised in supplication. The little girl sat quietly on the mat, her eyes closed, lips moving in silent imitation. Afterward, they shared a simple meal beneath the stars, and Yusuf told them a story about a man who found peace not in arrival but in trusting the journey. The children listened, wide-eyed, as the stars above blinked into place. That night, Yusuf slept beside their tent, wrapped in the warmth of companionship and shared faith. The desert, so vast and empty to some, had again offered company without asking. As he closed his eyes, he thought of the old man, of the ruins, of the wind that never lost its way, and he whispered into the cool night, "Ya Rab, let every path I walk be a bridge to people, to peace, and to you." The morning came gently, with the quiet stir of movement inside the tent and the comforting crackle of firewood. Yusuf rose early, just as the light broke over the valley. He performed wudu beside the little pool, its surface still and reflective like a mirror to the sky. He prayed beneath a tree, its dry branches stretching above like open hands. The air was cool, and the clouds overhead had begun to gather in soft streaks, a welcome change from the constant sun. The woman offered breakfast, dates, flatbread, and warm tea. The children sat close, already asking questions. "Where will you go now?" the boy asked, half curious, half worried. Yusuf smiled gently. "Wherever Allah writes next." The girl tilted her head. "But how do you know where that is?" "I don't," Yusuf replied honestly. "But I know who does." They understood in their own quiet way. Before he left, the woman handed him a pouch of dried herbs and a folded cloth. "In case the wind turns colder," she said. He thanked her with sincerity. "May your waiting bring peace." "And may your walking bring remembrance," she replied. The road unfolded again, this time through flatter land where grasses peeked through the sand and the rocks were smooth and red, shaped by long-forgotten rain. Yusuf walked slowly, letting his thoughts stretch like the path before him. He thought about how stillness wasn't always a place, it was a state of heart, and how sometimes the people who appeared for just a moment could teach you more than those who stayed for years. As noon passed, the sky grew heavier. Gray clouds thickened, stretching across the horizon. The air grew cool and carried a strange scent, earth, wind, and something distant, perhaps rain. It had been many days since Yusuf had seen rain. He pressed forward, his pace calm, letting the land guide him. Not far ahead he spotted a low ridge where flat stones jutted out like fingers. As he climbed, the first drops began to fall, light at first, then heavier. He found shelter beneath the stone ledge, setting his satchel down and unrolling the cloth the woman had given him. It served as a blanket now, a small act of care continuing its journey. The rain fell steadily, creating music on the rocks, soft and rhythmic like a heartbeat. Yusuf leaned back, closed his eyes, and listened. Each drop was a mercy, cooling, cleansing, alive. He thought of the verse, "And we sent down from the sky blessed rain, whereby we give growth to gardens and grain to be harvested." Surah Kaf 59. Rain was not disruption, it was provision. Even in the desert, even when it came quietly. As the storm deepened, Yusuf built a small fire using the dry wood he carried. He brewed a handful of the herbs into tea, letting the warmth rise with the steam. He sat in silence, sipping slowly, wrapped in gratitude. He took out his notebook and wrote, "Rain in the desert is like a whispered answer to a prayer you didn't know you made." The afternoon faded into evening and the storm softened. Clouds drifted apart, revealing streaks of amber and purple across the sky. The desert, washed and quiet, breathed calmly again. Before Maghrib, Yusuf stood to pray beneath the open sky. The land glistened, dotted with small puddles and glistening stone. The wind had shifted, cooler now, like it had something to say. As night settled, Yusuf remained by the fire. Stars began to appear again, slow and deliberate, like gentle lanterns hung by the most merciful himself. Wrapped in his cloak, he lay down and gazed upward. He didn't know where tomorrow would lead, but he felt no fear, because every step had been guided, not by maps, but by trust. And in that trust, even the rain was a companion. Sleep came gently once more, soft as a prayer, steady as the stars. The morning after the rain was unlike any Yusuf had known. The desert, so often quiet and bare, now shimmered with hidden life. The air was crisp, sweet with the scent of wet earth. Tiny green shoots poked through the soil. The wind whispered gently, as if grateful for the sky's mercy. Yusuf sat near the fading fire, sipping the last of the herb tea. His heart was calm, full, not because he had reached any final destination, but because he had learned to stop looking for one. He prayed Fajr under a sky painted with gold and blue, the world around him newly washed, freshly written. With his pack on his shoulder and the cloth shawl tied around his neck, he set off again. The path now was less of a path and more of a gentle suggestion. Here and there, stones seemed to form lines. Bushes grew where water had once flowed. Birds passed overhead, their wings slicing the silence like verses in flight. By mid-morning, he reached a place unlike the others. It was not marked on any map, and yet something deep within him stirred. A wide, flat valley opened before him, surrounded by pale cliffs carved by time. In the middle stood a single tree, old, strong, its trunk twisted by years of wind. Beneath its branches lay remnants of what had once been a home. Low walls now half swallowed by earth, a broken wooden beam, a clay bowl still whole. Yusuf stepped closer, slowly. His breath caught. He knew this place, not with his mind but with his heart. He had been here before, not recently. Long ago. Memories flickered like sunlight through leaves. He saw himself as a boy, playing near the tree while his father prayed under the open sky. He remembered his mother gathering herbs in a pouch, humming softly the same way the woman in the tent had done. He remembered laughter echoing across this land, simple, soft, full of life. This was where they had lived, for a short season perhaps, but it had been real. He knelt beside the old tree, pressing his palm to the dry roots. "Subhanallah," he whispered. "You brought me here, not by chance but by mercy." He sat beneath its shade, letting the memories return, not with pain but with peace. His parents were long gone, but their presence lingered in the shape of the valley, the scent of the air, the way the sunlight filtered through the branches. It was as if the land itself had remembered him. He took out his mushaf and opened it to a familiar page. The wind turned the leaves for him, stopping at a verse he knew well. "And your Lord has not forgotten you." Surah Ad-Duha 93:3. Yusuf recited it aloud, his voice steady, filled with feeling, not forgotten, not lost. He stayed there the entire day, doing little but listening. To the wind, to the birds, to the silence. At Dur he prayed where his father once had. At Asr he gathered smooth stones and placed them in a line, like a mark not for others but for his own soul. He didn't need to build anything. He only needed to remember. As sunset approached, the sky turned orange, then pink, then deep indigo. The stars returned, same as always, but tonight they seemed closer, more known. He wrote one final line in his notebook. "Some journeys are circles. We leave so we can return with new eyes and remember what was never truly lost." That night, Yusuf lay beneath the tree where he had once fallen asleep as a child. The roots were thicker now. The bark was worn. But the tree still stood, and so did he. His breath slowed. The desert cooled. Sleep came gently, carrying with it a quiet certainty. The journey was not over, but he was finally home. Dawn unfolded like a prayer across the valley. The sky, painted in soft strokes of peach and lavender, welcomed the new day without rush. Beneath the old tree, Yusuf stirred gently, his eyes opening to the familiar landscape reborn in morning light. He remained still for a moment, listening. No wind, no footsteps, just the hush of peace. He offered Fajr beneath the tree just as he had the morning before, and perhaps as his father once had long ago. The earth was cool beneath his feet. The breeze that rose with the sun felt like a farewell, or a beginning. Yusuf didn't plan to stay long. He had never meant to. This place, once forgotten by his mind but not his soul, had fulfilled its purpose, not by sheltering him but by reminding him who he was. After prayer, he sat with his notebook, the pages now filled with reflections, du'as, names of people he'd met, and places he'd passed through. Each line was a piece of his journey, a thread in the long tapestry that had begun the day he stepped away from what he thought was his life. He wrote quietly, "To walk with trust is to walk lightly, to leave without clinging, to return without fear." He closed the notebook, wrapped it in cloth, and tucked it into his satchel. Today he would walk again, not because he was searching, but because walking had become worship. By mid-morning he rose, dusted off his clothes, and stood at the edge of the valley. From here the land spread wide again. Hills and plains, perhaps another village far ahead, perhaps another soul waiting for a simple salam. Before he left, he knelt beside the tree one last time and placed a small stone near the roots. Not as a marker for others, but as a quiet promise to return, someday, maybe not in this world. The sun climbed higher. The warmth wrapped around him like a familiar cloak. He began walking, slow, steady, unburdened. He walked through open land, crossing where streams had once flowed and where new green shoots now whispered of rain. The sky above was clear, and the silence between footsteps was filled with gentle remembrance. All through the day, Yusuf passed signs of life. Distant flocks, birds in migration, a lone fox darting between stones. Each was like a verse, pointing back to the one who created all things in balance. When the sun began to descend again, Yusuf paused by a ridge overlooking a wide stretch of land. The horizon blazed gold. The breeze kissed his face. He sat not because he was tired, but because some views were meant to be received like gifts. From his bag he took a single date and a sip of water. Then, resting his back against a warm rock, he let his eyes close, not in sleep but in shukr. He whispered softly for no one but his Lord, Ya Rab, you brought me through without noise, without pride, without crowd. You gave me company in stillness, lessons in silence, and direction in uncertainty. Let me always walk as a traveler, grateful, gentle, and aware. The stars began to appear above, one by one, shy and slow. The wind returned, cool and calm. And Yusuf, alone on the ridge yet not lonely, finally understood. Survival had never meant escaping nature or hardship. It had meant remembering who sustained him through both. He wasn't surviving the desert, he was being guided through it, not to a final destination, but to a better version of himself. Story number 3, The Journey of Stillness. The sound of gentle waves lapping against wood echoed like a lullaby passed down by the earth itself. Yunus opened his eyes slowly, adjusting to the soft blue glow of dawn. Sky above, water below, nothing else in sight, just light air and the steady rhythm of the sea. His small wooden boat floated quietly, far from the coastline he had left behind 2 days ago. There had been no storm, no urgency. He hadn't run away from anything. He had simply drifted, willingly, patiently. There are journeys you plan, and then there are the ones that choose you. It began with the need for space. The city had grown too loud, the days too rushed, the soul too cluttered. So Yunus had packed a few essentials: a flask of water, a handful of dates, a worn copy of the Quran wrapped in cloth, and a light shawl. Not the absence of sound, but the kind of silence that speaks. And now he was here, nowhere and everywhere at once. The sea shimmered like a giant mirror, catching the early morning sun and scattering its warmth in every direction. A cool breeze passed through, carrying with it the scent of salt, the whisper of distance and something more, something unspoken. Yunus leaned over the edge of the boat, looking down into the water. His reflection stared back, calmer than he remembered, older somehow. Not in years, but in understanding. The boat rocked gently, cradling him like a mother might cradle a child. He took a deep breath. There was no panic, no fear, just surrender, just presence. He reached into his satchel and pulled out the Quran, opening it without searching for a specific page. His eyes landed on a verse he knew well. And he is with you wherever you are. Surah Al-Hadid 57:4. A strange comfort wrapped around him. Not loud, not overwhelming, but subtle, deep. Like something ancient had been waiting for him to remember it. The morning passed slowly. Time moved differently out here, untied from minutes and hours. There was only the light, the water, the wind, and his thoughts. He closed his eyes and let the sun warm his face. Even his heartbeat had softened. By afternoon he ate quietly, 3 dates and a sip of water. The boat drifted with the current, guided by nothing he could see, and yet it felt right. Every moment felt placed, intentional. Yunus thought of his grandmother, how she would sit by the window whispering prayers between each breath. She used to say, "Stillness is not being lost. Stillness is where you're found." At the time he hadn't understood. Now he wasn't so sure. As the sky began to turn amber and gold, he saw a bird overhead, a solitary one gliding easily across the open sky. It circled once and then disappeared into the horizon. Yunus smiled. "You know where you're going," he whispered. "Maybe I'll learn too." Evening came like a gentle visitor, no sudden change, just a gradual dimming, like someone turning down the light in a quiet room. He wrapped his shawl around his shoulders and listened to the world fade into night. Stars blinked into view, scattered like 1,000 tiny prayers. The sea grew darker, but not cold, not empty. It felt full, alive with meaning, echoing every silent hope and every unspoken dua. Yunus lay back in the boat, arms folded beneath his head, the Quran resting on his chest. Above him, the night sky stretched wide and endless, and for the first time in a long time he felt small, but not in a lonely way, in a connected way, as if his heart had finally found the rhythm of the universe. He didn't know where he would wake up, but he knew this: the journey had already begun, not across the sea, but within. And so, under a sky filled with stars and stillness, Yunus drifted into sleep, held not by the boat but by something greater. The morning arrived without sound, as if it tiptoed softly over the sea and settled gently on Yunus's eyelids. He opened his eyes slowly, greeted by the pale gold of a quiet sunrise. The boat had shifted ever so slightly, but the water around him was calm, almost glass-like. It didn't feel like he had moved far, yet everything felt new. Yunus sat up, wrapped his shawl closer around his shoulders, and recited a short dua for waking. There was a lightness in his chest, the kind that comes not from escape but from surrender. He looked out at the horizon, still endless, still open, and whispered, "Alhamdulillah." The waves nudged the boat gently as if urging him to stand. He did slowly, stretching his limbs while keeping his balance. The boat swayed beneath him like a living thing. He smiled at its rhythm. It had become his home, his prayer mat, his sanctuary. He made wudu using a small portion of the water he had saved in a flask and stood to pray Fajr. There was no solid ground beneath him, only the wooden planks of his boat and the water below. But his heart felt grounded. As he bowed and rose in prayer, the sea moved with him, as though mimicking his motions, echoing his worship in silence. After the prayer, he sat in stillness, watching the morning unfold. The sky blushed with soft blues and pale yellows. Birds flew in the distance, tiny against the vastness. One passed overhead, a white gull letting out a distant cry that faded into the breeze. There was no plan for the day, no schedule to follow, just breath, just reflection. Yunus thought about how strange it was, this feeling of contentment without knowing what would come next. He wasn't in control, and that was, somehow, peaceful. He reached for the Quran again, unwrapping it with care. Its pages fluttered in the breeze like the wings of a resting bird. He opened it to a verse and read quietly, "Indeed, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest." Surah Ar-Ra'd 13:28. The word settled into his chest like sunlight warming cold stone. How often had he read that verse without feeling it? Here, floating in the middle of nowhere, it felt real, not just true. Real. Around midday, the sky grew brighter, and the sun cast soft diamonds across the water's surface. Yunus reached into his satchel for another small meal, 2 dates and a sip of water. He chewed slowly, gratefully. Every bite reminded him of how little a person truly needs. He dipped his hand into the sea and let the cool water run through his fingers. The ocean didn't resist, it just flowed, moved, accepted. He closed his eyes and asked Allah for that same quality. "Let me flow where you guide me," he whispered. The boat drifted steadily, gently. There was no shore in sight, but he didn't look for one. He wasn't here to escape, he was here to remember. The sea was not his test, it was his teacher. By late afternoon, clouds began to gather. Not dark or threatening, just soft and slow-moving, like thoughts passing through the mind. A light breeze danced across the surface, carrying with it the distant scent of rain. Yunus welcomed the change. Every shift in weather was a reminder. Nothing stays the same, and that's part of the mercy. He wrapped the shawl tighter as the air cooled. The first few drops of rain fell lightly, like tiny kisses from the sky. They tapped against the boat, his skin, his Quran cover. He tucked the book away and tilted his head upward, letting the rain wash across his face. It was pure, soothing, as if Allah was saying, "I see you, I am with you." Evening came slowly again. the clouds parting just enough for the sunset to paint its colors across the sea. Shades of orange, coral, and dusky purple rippled over the water like a masterwork in motion. Eunice watched in silence, absorbing every moment like a child watching a story unfold. As night returned, he adjusted his position, laying down again with his eyes fixed on the first appearing stars. He whispered a quiet dua for safety, for forgiveness, for closeness to the one who created all this beauty. There was no noise, no tension, just the sea, the stars, and the soul. Eunice closed his eyes, his lips moving in silent dicker. He didn't know where he would drift tomorrow, but he trusted the one guiding the wind. And so he fell asleep again, wrapped in peace, floating gently across the ocean of stillness. Eunice woke to a silence deeper than usual. The waves were still there, gently moving the boat, but something felt different, like the air was holding its breath. The sky above was soft gray, blanketed with early morning mist. It wrapped around the sea like a shawl of quiet. Eunice sat up slowly, the boat swaying beneath him, and looked out in every direction. For the first time in days he saw it, a distant shadow. Land, not loud, not dramatic. Just there, emerging slowly from behind the mist as if it had been waiting patiently to be seen. He didn't rush, he simply watched. The island seemed peaceful, modest in size, wrapped in green and stone. No buildings, no boats. Just nature, untouched and calm. Eunice smiled gently. He whispered, "Alhamdulillah," not because he had been saved, but because he had been seen. There's a difference. He performed his morning prayer in the boat, the island resting on the horizon. Each movement of the prayer felt like a conversation, his body and soul aligning with purpose. He didn't pray for rescue. He prayed for clarity, for connection, for gratitude. By mid-morning, the boat had slowly drifted closer. The island grew clearer, tall grasses swaying in the breeze, small hills rising gently behind the shoreline, and palm trees leaning slightly toward the sea as if in sujud. He guided the boat gently toward the shore, using a wooden paddle he had carried but never used until now. Every stroke was deliberate. There was no urgency, just the rhythm of trust. When the boat's front finally kissed the sand, he stepped onto the shore barefoot. The sand was warm, soft, and strangely familiar, like a memory forgotten and now returned. He walked a few steps, letting his feet sink slightly into the earth. The ground felt steady, but his heart still swayed with the sea. The island was quiet, but not empty. It was full of sound, just not the kind that demands attention. The rustle of palm leaves, the chirp of distant birds, the sigh of wind weaving through tall grass. It felt like a place that listened more than it spoke. Eunice found a spot beneath a large tree and sat down. The shade cooled his skin while the sunlight danced between the leaves. He reached into his satchel and took out his Quran, opening it again to whatever page welcomed him. He brings them out from darkness into light. Surah Al-Baqarah 2:257. He closed the book and placed it gently on his lap. Darkness wasn't always a punishment. Sometimes it was a shelter, until the heart was ready to step into the light. For hours he simply stayed there, breathing, listening, observing. There was no one to impress, no story to tell. Just this moment. Eventually hunger visited softly. He ate a date and drank the last of his water. He wasn't worried. Something in him believed provision would come. Maybe in the form of rain, maybe a stream, maybe fruit, or maybe patience. As the sun moved higher, he explored the island slowly. Every corner felt untouched, sacred. He found a small clearing where sunlight poured through, warming the earth. He stood there for a while, letting the light fall on his face, eyes closed. He whispered, "This is enough." Eunice didn't know if anyone had ever lived here, or if anyone ever would. But he felt welcome, as if the island had been waiting for him, not to conquer but to rest, to reflect. He built a small shelter using driftwood and large palm leaves, not out of fear, but out of respect. The act of creating something, however simple, grounded him. It reminded him that even in surrender, effort has its place. As afternoon passed, a light drizzle began to fall, soft, warm, cleansing. Eunice let the rain soak into his skin. He raised his hands not in request but in thanks. He filled his flask with the fresh drops, placing it carefully beside his Quran, as if both were sources of nourishment, one for the body, one for the soul. Evening crept in quietly, painting the sky with warm tones again. Eunice prayed Maghrib facing the sea, the boat gently rocking in the shallow water nearby like a friend resting too. That night, he lay beneath his shelter, wrapped in his shawl, listening to the sounds of the island as they mingled with the rhythm of his own breath. The ground felt solid, but his heart still floated somewhere between earth and sky. He thought of all the things he used to chase, and how silence had given him more than noise ever had. The stars peeked through the scattered clouds. The air smelled of sea and rain. And as Eunice slowly closed his eyes, he felt something rise in his chest, not a question, not an answer, just peace. This island was not an escape. It was a return. Eunice woke before the sun. The sky was still deep blue, painted with stars slowly dimming. A light wind passed through the palms and the sea whispered softly against the shore. The world was quiet but not empty. It was like the pause between breaths, filled with possibility. He sat up beneath his small shelter and wrapped his shawl around his shoulders. The earth beneath him was warm, even in the early hours. He breathed in deeply and then exhaled slowly, like he was practicing how to be present. He whispered the morning dua, then made wudu using the rainwater he had collected in a small carved leaf bowl. His movements were careful, deliberate. He had learned out here that nothing should be rushed, especially connection. He stood to pray. There was no adhan, but the sky itself felt like a call to worship. His feet pressed into the soft sand as he bowed, his head touching the earth, grounding him. It didn't matter that he was alone. Allah had always been with him. After Fajr, Eunice sat watching the horizon. The first strands of sunlight touched the sea, painting it with shades of honey and rose. He thought about how every day began the same yet always felt different, like the world was constantly renewing itself for whoever chose to witness it. As the sky brightened, he noticed something unusual: footprints. Just beyond his shelter, pressed into the damp morning sand, were a series of shallow footprints. Not his, not fresh. Just there, faint as if left long ago but revealed now by the right light and angle. Eunice rose slowly and followed them, not out of fear but curiosity. The prints were gentle, as if made by someone walking with intention or reverence. They curved along the shore, disappearing into a cluster of palm trees. He followed them quietly, listening to each step he made. The deeper into the trees he went, the softer everything became. It wasn't a jungle, just a grove, peaceful, shaded, cool. Then he saw it. A circle of stones carefully placed with the remnants of ash in the center. Someone had once made fire here. Eunice knelt by the circle, his fingers brushing one of the stones. It was smooth, rounded, shaped by time and tide. He looked around, half expecting someone to step out from the trees. But the grove remained still. He wasn't afraid. Somehow this discovery felt like reassurance. Not that he wasn't alone, but that others had also passed through, seeking, finding, surrendering. He sat near the stone circle and recited softly, "And we are closer to him than his jugular vein." Surah Kaf 50:16. Maybe the one who made this fire had also sat here, whispering dhikr into the morning air. Maybe they too had come here not to be found, but to find themselves. Eunice stayed there until the light changed again, until the grove was filled with golden shafts of sunlight filtering through the leaves. Then gently he rose and made his way back toward the shore. He spent the rest of the morning walking the edge of the island. He noticed things he hadn't seen before: a small stream trickling between rocks, tiny crabs dancing in the wet sand, and trees heavy with green fruit. Risk, waiting patiently. He picked a few fruits and tasted them carefully. They were sweet, simple, nourishing, like everything else here. With renewed energy, he returned to his shelter and tidied it, brushing away leaves, retying a loose edge. The act of caring for something, even something small, brought comfort. Effort was not just survival, it was worship. By midday, the sun stood tall and warm above. Eunice sat in the shade, sipping water and reflecting on the footprints, the fire circle, the stream, the fruits. Nothing here felt random. Every small discovery felt placed, timed. He thought about his old life again. How every day had been packed with noise, with doing, with moving fast but going nowhere. Out here, every moment felt like prayer. As the afternoon deepened, clouds gathered gently overhead. A light breeze returned, and with it the soft sound of distant waves rising. Not a storm, just a shift. He watched the sea darken slightly under the changing sky. He wrapped his shawl around him and whispered quietly, "Ya Rab, whatever you send, let it be a mercy." Rain began to fall lightly again, tapping on the shelter, the leaves, his skin. He smiled, tilting his head up to receive it like a blessing. He closed his eyes and breathed it in. That night the sky cleared slowly. Stars emerged like lanterns. He lay under them again, Quran resting near his heart, and let his mind drift. Were the footprints a sign? A reminder? Or just a quiet gift from the past? He didn't need an answer. Not tonight. Some things weren't meant to be solved, only remembered. Like how the heart knows it was created for something greater, even when the world forgets. And so Eunice drifted into sleep again as the island breathed softly around him. A place of prayer, of peace, of footprints, both in sand and soul. The morning light returned with the quiet confidence of one who knows it will always be welcome. Eunice awoke to the soft murmur of leaves dancing in the breeze and the faint gurgle of water nearby. He sat up slowly, greeted by the gentle hush of the world around him. The island was awake but not rushing. Everything moved with ease. He rose and performed wudu using the rainwater in his flask, then stood beneath the wide sky for Fajr prayer. His feet pressed gently into the sand and the ocean sang behind him. There was no roof above him, yet the sky felt like the most beautiful ceiling a masjid could have. After the final taslim, he sat quietly, knees drawn up, gazing toward the sea. The boat still rested at the shore, its frame steady and familiar. But Eunice wasn't drawn to it today. His heart felt a quiet tug inward toward the island, toward the unknown. He remembered the sound he had heard in the early hours, a stream, faint but certain. So after wrapping his shawl and placing the Quran carefully in his satchel, Eunice began to walk inland. He passed again by the grove of palms and the stone fire circle, now cool and still. The footprints were gone, washed away by the tides of time, but something else awaited. The sound of water grew clearer with every step, a soft rhythmic babble like a voice gently reciting stories from long ago. Eunice followed it. Soon he arrived at a narrow stream winding through mossy stones and tall grass. Its water was clear, pure, running with a graceful patience. He knelt beside it and dipped his hands into the cool current, letting it pass over his fingers like silk. He whispered, "Subhanallah." He brought the water to his lips. It was sweet, refreshing. It reminded him of a verse he had once read, "And we made from water every living thing." Surat Al-Anbiya 21:30. He stayed by the stream for a long time, not to drink, but to listen. The way it curved around rocks, the way it slipped between blades of grass. It moved with such ease, never resisting, never hurrying. It simply went where it was meant to go. Eunice leaned back against a tree, the bark rough but grounding. The sky above was pale blue, dotted with slow-moving clouds. Time no longer felt like something to race. Out here, it was something to walk beside. He thought about how water always found its way, not through force but through surrender. And yet, in its surrender, it carved valleys, shaped stone, and nourished everything it touched. That, he realized, was real strength. He took out his Quran and opened it to a bookmarked page. His eyes settled on a verse that felt perfectly timed, as if placed there just for today. And whoever puts their trust in Allah, then He is sufficient for him. Surah At-Talaq 65:3. He closed the book gently, his heart full. Later, Eunice gathered smooth stones from near the stream and placed them in a small circle, mirroring the fire pit he had found before. not to light a fire, but as a quiet act of remembrance, a sign that someone had passed through, that someone had seen beauty and responded with gratitude. He sat there until the sun reached its peak, casting warm light through the trees. Then, rising with ease, he followed the stream further. It led him through pockets of wildflowers, their colors gentle and welcoming. Bees hummed softly and birds called to one another in quiet joy. Eventually, the stream looped back toward the sea, disappearing into a patch of reeds near the eastern edge of the island. Yunus followed it until the salt breeze returned, lifting his shawl and filling his lungs with the scent of the ocean. Back near the shore, he prayed dur beneath a wide tree that leaned protectively over the sand. After prayer, he sat again, watching the waves, the clouds, the light playing on the surface of the water. He thought of how everything in creation served without question. The wind blew, the waves rolled, the trees shaded, even the stones rested in stillness. He whispered, "Ya Rab, make me like them." By late afternoon, the sky began to change again, golden and slow. He gathered some fallen fruit, ate a small meal, and watched the sun begin its gentle descent. Time moved forward, but his heart felt still. As Maghrib approached, he prayed once more, facing the sea. The wind was soft, as if holding its breath during his sujud. That night, Yunus returned to his shelter. The stars peeked out once again, and he lay beneath them with the sound of the stream faintly audible in the distance. He thought of the water, how it moved through the island with purpose, how it never rushed yet always arrived. And he prayed that his heart might be like that stream, to go where it must, to carry what it's meant to, and to leave peace wherever it passes. The island woke slowly, like a dream stretching into daylight. Yunus opened his eyes to a sky brushed with soft pastels, peach lavender and a quiet blue that felt like mercy. The ocean was calm again, its waves folding gently into the sand, whispering their rhythms to anyone willing to listen. He sat up beneath his shelter and took a moment before standing. No rush, no reason to hurry. His body had learned to match the rhythm of the world around him, slow, deliberate, meaningful. After wudu and prayer, he remained in sujud a little longer than usual. The earth was soft beneath his forehead. The island didn't speak, but it always listened. When he sat up, the morning breeze came, cool, steady, with the scent of salt and sun-warmed leaves. It stirred the edges of his shawl and lifted the corners of a folded cloth he had tucked under a stone near his Quran. He reached for it curiously. It wasn't cloth. It was paper. His heart paused. Yunus unfolded it slowly. The paper was weathered but whole, folded many times with a small seal pressed into the corner, faded but visible. A palm tree within a circle. Carefully, he opened the letter. The ink was still legible, though faint. If you are reading this, you have found what I also found. Quiet, rest, and the voice of your own soul. I do not know your name, but I know your heart, because only the searching arrive here. This island does not save us. It reminds us. And in remembrance, we are healed. May you walk gently. May you stay until you no longer need to stay. A traveler like you. Yunus read it twice, then again. His hands didn't tremble, but something in him softened further, like a knot quietly unraveling. He sat back and let the letter rest in his lap. He looked around at the trees, the sky, the steady rhythm of waves. Somewhere out there, another soul had stood here, had prayed here, had waited, healed, and perhaps moved on. He wasn't alone in this stillness after all. And still, that didn't surprise him. The island felt like a resting place for those carrying invisible weight. He folded the letter again and placed it gently in his satchel beside the Quran. 2 texts, both reminders, both bridges. Later, Yunus walked along the shore. The tide had gone out slightly, leaving behind small pools of seawater caught between stones. In one of them, a single white feather floated, turning slowly with the water's movement. He picked it up carefully and turned it in his fingers. A feather, a letter, a breeze, signs. Not loud, not grand, but enough. He smiled gently and tucked the feather into a fold of his shawl. As the sun climbed higher, he felt a desire not to move outward but inward, toward reflection, toward gratitude. He returned to his shelter and took out his journal, a small one nearly full now, pages covered in careful handwriting. He wrote slowly, "Today I found a letter left by someone like me. I don't know their name, but I know what they felt. This place, this quiet, is a mirror. You don't hear answers here. You hear the questions differently." He paused, listening to the wind as it stirred the leaves above him. "I thought I was lost. But maybe I was just being redirected. Not away from the world, but toward myself. Toward Allah." Asr came and went, gentle as a sigh. Eunice prayed under a wide tree, then sat again by the stream. Its song hadn't changed, but it felt richer today, like the letter had given it new meaning. Later he walked to the eastern edge of the island where the stream met the sea. He hadn't lingered here before. It was quiet even more than the rest of the island. The wind gathered here too, but it didn't shout. It wrapped around him like a promise. Eunice stood still and whispered softly, "My Lord is with me and he will guide me." Surah Ash-Shu'ara 26:62. The clouds above drifted slowly and the sea shimmered in their reflection. He thought of how the Prophet Yusuf, peace be upon him, had once been in darkness too, not of night but of isolation, and how his heart had remained firm, filled with light even in a well, even in a prison. Yunus closed his eyes. He wasn't in a prison, but he understood now. Sometimes the stillness we fear is where the heart is truly freed. By Maghrib, the sky turned golden and the wind softened further. He prayed again, not because it was habit, but because it was what anchored everything else. That night, under a sky full of quiet stars, Yunus placed the letter beside him and lay on his side, the feather tucked still into his shawl. The stream whispered behind him, the waves in front, and his own soul, finally quiet between them. The night was different now. The moon had risen, full and bright, casting a soft glow over the island. Yunus had not noticed how much time had passed, but the change in the sky marked something new, a shift in the air. A stillness so deep that even the wind had calmed. Yunus woke beneath the stars as he had many nights before, but tonight felt special. The moonlight poured over him like an answer, like a soft embrace. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something, waiting for him to hear it. He sat up, the warmth of the earth still radiating beneath him. He stretched his legs out slowly and looked up at the sky. The stars were like old friends, distant yet familiar, their light steady and constant. And the moon, so close, so full, as though it had been waiting for this moment. He breathed in deeply, letting the quiet of the island fill him. The silence was not empty. It was full of everything he had come to learn here. The rhythm of the waves, the whisper of the trees, the flutter of a bird's wings in the distance. He whispered a quiet prayer, a dua for guidance, for clarity, for strength, and for patience. For sometimes the hardest part of the journey was simply waiting for the heart to understand what the mind could not yet see. The sound of the sea was soothing, and Yunus felt the pull of the water once again as though it was calling to him. But tonight the pull felt different. It wasn't about survival or thirst or any kind of need. It was about surrender. The way the ocean surrendered to the moon's pull, the way the trees surrendered to the wind. Yunus stood and walked toward the shore, the sand soft beneath his feet. Each step felt purposeful, like he was being led by something greater than himself. The sea was calm tonight, its surface a perfect mirror to the sky. The moon's reflection shimmered on the water, a silver thread weaving between the earth and the heavens. He stopped at the water's edge and knelt, letting the cool tide wash over his hands. The ocean was endless, stretching far beyond what the eye could see, just as the sky above felt endless, infinite. He closed his eyes and listened to the rhythm of the waves, the soft lapping sound that brought with it a sense of peace. "Ya Allah," he whispered, "let me be as patient as the sea, as constant as the moon." He stayed there for a long time, not thinking, not asking for anything, simply being. And in that stillness, Yunus realized something profound. It wasn't the survival he had learned here that had shaped him. It was the waiting. the patience to let things unfold, to allow himself to be shaped by time, by quiet moments, by the guidance of the divine. The moon began to lower in the sky, and Eunice knew the night was drawing to a close. He stood slowly, letting the last of the moon's light wash over him. As he walked back to his shelter, he felt the weight of the day's experiences settling inside him. He had found so much here, not just in the land, but in his heart. He thought of the letter he had found days ago and the message within it. The island didn't save him, it reminded him of his purpose, of the stillness in his soul, of his connection to Allah, to the world around him, and to all that had come before him. He made his way back to his shelter and lay down on the soft earth once more, the stars still watching over him. The moon had disappeared behind a cloud, but its light lingered, gentle and constant. He thought of his past, of the noise, of the constant movement, and how all of it had faded away, replaced by the stillness of this island. He thought of how he had come here thinking he was lost, only to find that he was simply being led back to himself. And now, as the night deepened and the world around him drifted into silence, Yunus closed his eyes, feeling his breath slow and his heart find peace. The journey was not over, he knew that. But tonight, the quiet felt complete. He didn't need to search anymore. He simply needed to listen. The moon had returned to the sky, a soft presence above the world, reminding him that everything came full circle in its own time. Yunus lay there beneath it, his heart full of gratitude. The silence was no longer empty. It was full. Dawn crept over the horizon like a secret being gently revealed. Yunus stirred as the first rays of light filtered through the canopy of trees above his shelter. The world had not rushed to wake. It had simply become awake in the quiet way the earth preferred. No sudden sounds, no alarms, just the gradual return of warmth and color. He sat up slowly and smiled. His sleep had been deep, dreamless, and healing. The kind of sleep that comes when the soul is no longer burdened by noise. After performing wudu, Yunus stood barefoot in the sand, facing the soft gold of the east. He offered Fajr prayer, the sky his ceiling, the trees his walls, the earth his carpet. There was peace in every movement. When he finished, he remained in place, knees drawn up, arms resting gently around them. The tide was lower today. The sea seemed thoughtful, as if it too had things to reflect on. Yunus looked down at the sand, where tiny green shoots had begun to grow near the base of his shelter. He hadn't planted anything, but life had begun to grow anyway. From the moisture, from the quiet, from the stillness. He leaned closer. The shoots were delicate, almost translucent, and small white flowers were beginning to open. A garden. A quiet, natural garden, forming slowly and without announcement. He smiled. It reminded him of something he once read. Indeed, those who believe and do righteous deeds, the most merciful will appoint for them affection. Surah Maryam, 1996. Love grows where hearts are sincere, and beauty follows stillness like the flower follows the sun. Yunus took a slow breath. The breeze was light today, barely enough to lift the edges of his shawl. Birds passed through the trees in silent arcs, and the stream murmured in the distance unchanged. He stood and wandered toward the heart of the island, toward the stream he now visited like one visits an old friend. Along the way, he passed the small circle of stones he had placed days earlier. They hadn't moved. A few leaves had gathered around them, but the shape remained. Quiet, circular, whole. The stream welcomed him with its usual calm. Yunus knelt beside it and let the cool water run over his hands. He cupped it, drank, and then sat back against a familiar tree. Here he brought out his journal again. This time he didn't write right away. He just held the pen and looked up into the trees. Light filtered through the leaves, dancing across his skin and pages like blessings. After a while he wrote, "There's a garden growing where I sleep. I didn't plant it, but I think it grew from silence, from peace, from prayer. Everything on this island teaches by example. The stream shows patience, the trees show surrender. The moon shows faith in phases, even the smallest leaf falling without fear. He stopped and smiled softly. Later that afternoon, Yunus walked further than he had before, beyond the stream, beyond the place where the feather had fallen. The trees thinned and he came to a small clearing surrounded by wildflowers. In the middle stood a single tree, taller than the rest with low, wide branches. He approached it carefully and sat beneath its shade. The trunk was wide and strong, and there was something about it that felt knowing. He leaned against it and looked out over the field. Butterflies passed through patches of sunlight. A few bees moved from flower to flower. Time felt like it had paused just for him to see this. Yunus closed his eyes. In his heart, he thought of the Prophet Ibrahim, peace be upon him, how he had once looked at the stars, the moon, and the sun, seeking his Lord through creation, and how his heart finally settled not on the creation, but the Creator behind it all. This island, too, was filled with signs, but none were the destination. They were simply guiding him inward toward the garden within. By Asr, Yunus was back at the shore. He sat by the waves, legs tucked beneath him, watching the sunlight stretch across the water. A gentle warmth lived in his chest now, a knowing, a calmness that wasn't there before. He whispered softly, "Indeed, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest." Ra'ad 13:28. The wind carried his voice across the shore, as if the island itself agreed. That evening he sat beside the garden again, watching as its small flowers gently closed for the night. Everything here knew when to bloom, and everything knew when to rest. Yunus lay down beneath the sky, stars once again stretching across the heavens. He placed a hand gently over his chest, feeling the rhythm of his own heart. It beat not from fear, not from hurry, but from peace, and for the first time he realized he wasn't waiting to be rescued anymore. He had already been found. The morning greeted Yunus with the same serene quiet that had become his world. The sun had not yet fully risen, but the sky was already filled with a soft glow. The island felt timeless, as if it existed in a place beyond hours and days. Yunus stretched and stood, his body now accustomed to the rhythm of the land, slow, deliberate, grounded. He had learned that there was no rush here, no urgency. Everything unfolded in its own time. He performed wudu, the cool water from his flask soothing his skin as he prepared for prayer. The world around him was still, no sound except the gentle whisper of leaves in the wind, the distant call of a bird, and the faint gurgling of the stream. Once again he faced the rising sun, offering his Fajr prayer with the same sense of peace that had accompanied him for many days. His feet touched the earth and his heart connected to the sky, to the Creator, to the world in between. After the prayer, Yunus sat quietly, his back against a tree. He felt a soft warmth spreading through him. The island had become a place of healing, but now it felt like more than that. It was becoming a home. As the sun rose higher, he realized that something had shifted within him. The sense of loss that had brought him here, the uncertainty that had led him to seek refuge, was no longer present. His heart, once heavy, was now filled with a quiet understanding. The island had given him peace not by filling the void, but by showing him that there had never been a void to begin with. The stillness of the island mirrored the stillness of his soul, and in that stillness he found everything he needed. Yunus stood and made his way toward the garden he had discovered earlier. The small flowers that had opened the day before were still there, their delicate petals soft and pure in the early light. He knelt beside them and gently touched the ground. The earth was rich, full of life, and he realized that he too was a part of this cycle. Just as the flowers grew in their own time, so had his heart. He reached down and touched the roots of the plants, feeling the quiet strength that came from deep within the earth. It reminded him of the verse in the Quran, "And he it is who created from water every living thing." Surah Al-Furqan 25:54. The earth, the water, the air, they all played their part in the creation of life. And Yunus understood now that he too was part of this greater creation. His heart had been nourished by the same stillness, the same patience, the same grace that flowed through the trees, the stream, and the sky. Later, he sat by the water's edge, watching the play of light on the surface of the sea. The waves rolled gently in, one after another, each wave a quiet reminder that life continued steadily, without haste. He had come here searching for something, but now he realized that the search had ended. There was no more need to search. Everything he had been looking for was already here. His heart was at peace. As the day wore on, Eunice felt a shift inside him. It was subtle at first, an understanding that seemed to grow with each passing moment. It wasn't something that could be named or explained. It was simply a quiet knowing, a recognition that his journey on this island had reached its end. The letter he had found weeks ago had been a reminder, a message from another soul who had walked this path before him. Eunice had thought that it was the island that had changed him, but now he realized that it was the process of surrendering to the stillness, of letting go of everything he thought he needed, that had brought him to this place. By the time Maghrib came, the island was bathed in golden light. Eunice stood by the shore, looking out at the horizon. The sun was setting slowly, sinking beneath the water in a display of color that filled the sky with shades of purple, pink, and orange. He felt the weight of the day's lessons settle into his heart. The island had been a place of reflection, but now it was a place of gratitude. He no longer felt the need to be elsewhere. He no longer felt the need to be someone else. He was simply Eunice, here in this moment, at peace with himself and the world around him. That night, as he lay beneath the stars, he knew that the journey had come full circle. He had arrived at the place he had been seeking all along, a place of stillness, of peace, and of deep connection. The world was quiet now, the sound of the ocean lapping against the shore like a lullaby. Eunice closed his eyes, his heart full, and drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep. Morning came like a whisper. The sky was awash in soft golds and pale blues, and a light breeze passed through the trees, stirring the leaves gently, as if waking them with care. Eunice opened his eyes slowly, the scent of the sea in the air and the warmth of the earth beneath him. Another sunrise. But today, it felt different. Not because anything had changed outside him, but because something had settled within. He sat up slowly and watched the horizon. The ocean stretched wide and open, the waves lapping in their usual rhythm. But this time they no longer called him. They welcomed him. He had made peace with where he was. The need to escape, to search, to fix had dissolved. What remained was presence. And in that presence, Eunice found something deeper than he ever expected. Return. Not the return to a place, but the return to himself. He stood and made wudu with the last of the fresh stream water he had stored. His movements were slow, deliberate. With the sky as his ceiling and the birds as his only company, he prayed Fajr, his heart soft, his soul quiet. He remembered the first days, how lost he had felt, how the silence had once seemed so loud, but now it was his companion, a friend he would carry with him wherever he went. As the sun rose higher, Eunice decided to take one final walk across the island, not to search, but to offer farewell. He moved gently, as if not to disturb the peace that lived in every leaf and stone. He passed the stream, whispering thanks to its flowing water. He paused by the tall tree in the clearing, laying a hand on its trunk, a silent gesture of gratitude. And when he reached the little garden that had grown near his shelter, he sat beside it and smiled. The flowers had opened again, soft and white, unbothered by time. Their petals reached toward the sun as if in praise. Eunice closed his eyes and placed his palm over his heart. He had learned to live with stillness. He had learned to trust stillness. He had learned that survival wasn't always about overcoming the elements, but about returning to the essence. As he sat, a sound broke the quiet, soft, distant, unfamiliar. He turned toward the sea. Far off, barely visible, was the shape of a small boat. It bobbed gently on the waves, moving closer with time. Eunice felt no surge of panic or excitement, just stillness. He stood and walked toward the shore. By the time he reached the edge, the boat was clearer, simple, with a single man at its helm. An old fisherman by the look of him, with weathered skin and a peaceful face. He raised a hand in greeting as he approached. Eunice smiled and raised his in return. When the boat reached the shore, the man spoke gently. "You've been here a while." Eunice nodded. "Yes. I think I needed to be." The man looked around the island, nodding thoughtfully. "Most people who find this place don't come by accident." Eunice understood what he meant. This island wasn't marked on maps. It wasn't the kind of place one searched for. It was the kind of place one was guided to. "Are you ready to leave it?" the fisherman asked. Eunice looked back at the trees, the garden, the stream, the shelter. Then he looked inward at his own heart. He found no fear, no rush, only peace. "Yes," he said softly. "But I'm not really leaving. I think I'll carry it with me." The man smiled. "That's how it stays alive." They boarded the small boat together, and Eunice turned once more to look at the island. It seemed to glow under the morning sun, waves brushing gently against the shore like a blessing. It didn't feel like he was leaving a place. It felt like he was walking forward with it inside him. As the boat moved across the water, Eunice sat quietly, watching the island grow smaller behind him. But the stillness remained. It was in his breath, in his thoughts, in his heart. He had not escaped life, he had embraced it, and now he was ready to return. Not to the noise, not to the rush, but to live with stillness wherever life may take him. The sea shimmered around the boat, the sky wide and open above. Eunice breathed in the air, fresh and full, and whispered a final prayer. "O Allah, guide me as you guided me here. Keep me near as you kept me in stillness. Let the peace you taught me become the light I walk with." And so the island faded, but the journey never ended, because the stillness had become home.